Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, 351 BC, Joe Sachs translation, inquires what the human good is, happiness as a being at work of the soul in accordance with the best virtue, through 10 books that move from ends and the mean, through the virtues of character and thinking, justice, unrestraint, and friendship, to pleasure and the contemplative life. Sachs restores energia as being at work rather than smooth activity, so the ethics reconnects with Aristotle's theoretical vocabulary. This summary reconstructs the dialectical movement of appearances, impasses, and resolutions in Aristotle's register. Abstract. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Joe Sachs translation, asks what the human good is and answers that happiness is a being at work of the soul in accordance with the best and most complete virtue, over a complete life, not without external goods. 10 books move dialectically from ends and method through habit and the mean, responsibility, the virtues of character, justice, the virtues of thinking, unrestraint and pleasure, friendship, and finally pleasure again as completion of being at work, culminating in contemplative happiness and the need for law and education. Sachs restores energia as being at work, hexis as active condition, and Akalon as the beautiful end of virtue, so the ethics reconnects with Aristotle's theoretical vocabulary. The summary reconstructs appearances, impasses, and resolutions rather than listing conclusions alone. Executive summary. The central thesis. The human good is happiness, eudaimonia, understood as being at work of soul in accordance with virtue, paradigmatically contemplative excellence, secondarily the political life of complete virtue of character, over a complete life and not without friends and other external goods. Virtue of character is an active condition and a mean relative to us, determined by practical judgment and for the sake of the beautiful. It arises by habituation, yet is not mindless habit. Knowing the good does not yet make one good. Choice, friendship, pleasure rightly ordered, and the city's laws are required so that logos and desire speak with one voice. Foundational observations. Ends, politics, and method. Every art and inquiry aims at some good. The architectonic art is politics, which orders the human good for the city. Clarity is only as the subject allows. Appearances, received opinions, and impasses before resolutions. And the young who live by passion are unfit hearers, because the end is becoming good, not collecting theories. Happiness as being at work. Eudaimonia is not a mood, possession, or Solonian reputation after death alone, but a being at work, energia, of soul in accordance with the best and most complete virtue, over a complete life, not without friends and other external goods as equipment. Sachs's hinge against function and frictionless activity keeps this from collapsing into organ roll biology or smooth busyness. Habit without mindless routine. Childhood habituation makes an enormous difference, or rather all the difference. Yet the good life is not a collection of routines that eliminate thinking and choice. Habit counteracts habit. Hexis is an active condition we hold, not a passive state, or English habit is dead repetition. Mean relative to us, for the beautiful. Virtue of character stand between excess and deficiency as practical judgment determines for the person and circumstances, an extreme in excellence, a mean in relation to the vices. It is not radiodial mediocrity or gentleman C blending in. The end common to the virtues is to Kalon, the beautiful, not noble as impractical high-mindedness or fine as fragile taste. Willing action and formed character. Force and ignorance of particulars can make acts unwilling. Mixed acts under threat are still chosen as the better in the circumstance. Wishing is for ends, deliberation for means, choice, proeresis, as deliberative desire. We are responsible for the character we form, because the apparent good tracks the active conditions we have made ourselves into. Virtues of character as a cast. Courage and Temperance, books 3-4. Open onto generosity, magnificence, greatness of soul, gentleness, and the social means of truthfulness, friendliness, and wit, each a mean for the sake of the beautiful, with shame as a fitting feeling for youth rather than a full virtue of the mature. Justice as another's good, complete virtue in relation to another. Particular justice as fair distribution by merit and corrective equalization of gains and losses. Reciprocity through need and currency. Natural and legal political justice. Epieikeia, decency, as the equitable correction of laws universal where it fails the particular. Practical judgment and the unity of virtue. Book VI's excellences of thinking, art, knowledge, practical judgment, wisdom, intellect. Culminate in phronesis, which discloses truth about what can be otherwise and cannot be severed from virtue of character. Cleverness hits means without the right end. Natural virtue, without governing judgment, is incomplete. Unrestraint between vice and virtue. One can act against correct logos through passion because knowledge may be present yet not fully at work, premise failure, derangement by desire. Unrestraint differs from vice, which endorses the bad end, from softness, and from rare animal-like or godlike extremes. Book 7 also opens the inquiry in a pleasure that Book X completes. Friendship as necessary and beautiful. No one would choose to live without friends despite having all other goods. Complete friendship is among the good who love each other for themselves, while utility and pleasure friendships are incomplete and easily dissolved. Friendship holds cities together. When people are friends, justice is less needed, yet among just things what inclines toward friendship is most just. The happy person still needs friends as shared being at work and awareness of living well. Pleasure, contemplation, and law. Pleasure is not the good, yet it completes unimpeded being at work as a bloom on the activity. Kinds of pleasure track kinds of activity. Highest happiness is contemplative. The political life of complete virtue is secondary. Discourses alone rarely make the many decent. Nature, habit, and teaching prepare the soul, and law's compulsory speech bridges the ethics to the politics. Significance and recommendation. Primary for anyone studying virtue, ethics, classical political philosophy, or Aristotle's practical works. Read with Sachs's preface in view, being at work, active condition, the beautiful. Then books 1 to 2 for the architectonic, 6 for practical judgment, 8 to 9 for friendship, and X for the contemplative summit and the turn to law. Pair with the politics. Do not treat the mean as a radio dial or habit as the elimination of choice. For forensic depth, follow each book's appearances and impasses rather than skipping to slogans. Translator's preface and introduction. Sachs. Joe Sachs opens by diagnosing ordinary English ethics translations. Less Latinate jargon than the metaphysics or physics, yet decisive shades of meaning lost. When Book I asks for the human organ and most versions say function, the reader is already steered toward a subordinate organ role, stomach for digestion, rather than toward the work that roots energia, being at work. The word Sachs treats as the hinge of Aristotle's whole thinking. Rendering energia as smooth activity is not false, but it gives nothing to chew on and severs the ethic from the theoretical books where the same word becomes actuality. Likewise, politican and ekonlogon are more than political and rational, meant for a city and having the power of speech. The politics claim that human association is not one more hive, because speech is not one more cry. Most decisive is hexis, not a passive state, and deadly when mistranslated habit, in the English sense of mindless routine. A hexis is an active condition, a way we hold ourselves, having taken hold of feelings that begin as mere passivities. Ethics names things pertaining to character. Character is made of such active conditions. We are responsible for the selves we become because we decisively form those conditions. The introduction wrestles three little words often taken as efficient, formal, and final causes of moral virtue. Habit, mean, noble, each easy to misunderstand. On habit, Aristotle does say childhood habituation makes an enormous difference, or rather all the difference. That does not make the good life a collection of mindless routines. Habituation is like breakfast for a productive day. necessary without being the whole cause or the final form. Habit counteracts habit. The mean is reached by straightening warped boards, aiming away from the worst extreme, guarding against pleasure seductions, qualitative standing between obstacles, not Seddon's radiodial arithmetic of courage as 0 between cowardice -5 and rashness +3. Virtue is an extreme in one sense and a mean in another. Sheepdog balance point anxiety is the wrong image for the stable equilibrium of the virtuous soul. What temperance concerns is not ounces of cake, but the right relation to the pleasure of eating. As when an unexpected guest arrives, and the temperate person neither hides the cake nor has nothing to offer. On the third word, translators fear to Kalin and say noble or fine, missing that Aristotle marks courage and magnificence as for the sake of the beautiful, the end common to the virtues. Right desire and right reason first perceive the end as beautiful. Since perception judges what is morally right, a virtuous act is like a well-made work that would take nothing added or subtracted, only more precise than art. Ordinary speech still says that was a beautiful thing you did. Sachs refuses the claim that Aristotle simply rejects a Platonic good itself. The ethics holds the question off as not first for us, while praising Plato for arguing toward first principles rather than from them. Choice looks to the pleasant, the beautiful, and the beneficial. The last drops away, and the inquiry narrows. The 10 books that follow are thus read through Sachs's lexicon. Happiness as being at work of soul in accordance with the best virtue. Character as active conditions. Ends as beautiful. Being at work. Energia, Sachs's hinge word. Work of a living thing, not subordinate function or frictionless activity. Active condition. Hex's character as held stance, not passive state or mindless habit. The beautiful, to Kalin end of virtue, not noble as impractical high-mindedness. Quote, the word ergon means work and is the root of energia, being at work, the most important word in all of Aristotle's thinking, which turns out in Book I of the Ethics to begin to unlock the meaning of human happiness. Quote, what defines a hexis is that it is not a passive state, but an active condition, a way in which we hold ourselves, having taken hold deliberately of the feelings and dispositions that are in us merely passively. Quote, Aristotle singles out as the distinguishing mark of courage, for example, that it is always for the sake of the beautiful, for this is the end of virtue. Book I, Happiness and Being at Work. The Good, Arts and Politics. Every art, inquiry, action, and choice seems to aim at some good, and hence, as the saying goes, the good is that at which all things aim. Aristotle opens from this shared appearance, but immediately complicates it. Ends differ. Some are ways of being at work, others works produced over and above the being at work. Where there are ends beyond actions, the works are by nature better than the activities. Medical knowledge aims at health, shipbuilding at a boat, strategy at victory, and in hierarchies of subordinate and master arts. The ends of the master arts are more worthy of choice. One might raise as an impasse whether there is some end wanted on account of itself, with everything else chosen for its sake, for otherwise desire would stretch beyond all bounds. If such an end exists, it is the highest good, and awareness of it would have great weight, like archers with a target. The inquiry belongs to the most governing capacity, and politics appears to be of this sort. It prescribes what knowledge ought to exist in cities and subordinates generalship, household economics, and rhetoric. Since politics uses the other kinds of knowledge and lays down law about what one ought to do, its end should include the ends of the other pursuits, the human good. Even if the good is the same for one person and for a city, the city's good appears greater and more complete. For a people, it is something more beautiful and more divine. The present pursuit aims at this, and is in a certain way political. Master art, the governing capacity whose end encompasses subordinate ends. Politics orders civic life toward the human good. Quote, every art and every inquiry, and likewise every action and choice, seems to aim at some good, and hence it has been beautifully said that the good is that at which all things aim. Quote, since this capacity makes use of the rest of the kinds of knowledge, and also lays down the law about what one ought to do and from what one ought to refrain. The end of this capacity should include the ends of the other pursuits, so that this end would be the human good. Method and the young. Having set the political horizon, Aristotle turns to method. One would speak adequately if one attained the clarity that goes along with the underlying material. Precision ought not to be sought in the same way in all discourse. The beautiful and just involve great disagreement, thought to belong only to convention. And goods, too, involve inconsistency, since wealth has ruined some and encouraged others. One ought to point out the truth roughly in an outline, and when speaking about things, so for the most part, reach conclusions of that sort. It belongs to an educated person to look for just so much precision as the nature of the thing admits. Good judgment goes along with education. It is not appropriate for a young person to study politics. The young are inexperienced in life's actions, about which politics speaks, and since they follow impulses, they would hear without benefit, since their end is action, not knowing. It makes no difference whether one is young in age or immature in character. The deficiency comes from living in accord with feeling. Knowledge comes without profit to those who lack self-restraint, but to those who keep desires in proportion, knowing these things would be of great benefit. The audience must have been beautifully brought up by habits, for the primary thing is that something is so, and if evident, there is no need for the reason why. Things known to us. Dialectical inquiry begins from what is familiar, not from first principles known simply. As Plato inquired, the road runs from the judges toward the boundary and back. Quote, "It belongs to an educated person to look for just so much precision in each kind of discourse as the nature of the thing one is concerned with admits. For to demand demonstrations from a rhetorician seems about like accepting probable conclusions from a mathematician." Quote, "For this reason, it is not appropriate for a young person to be a student of politics, since the young are inexperienced in the actions of life, while these are the things about which politics speaks and from which it reasons. Popular lives and the Platonic good." Taking up the thread again, Aristotle asks what politics aims at. In name, this is agreed. Happiness and living well is being happy. But about what happiness is, people dispute pleasure, wealth, honor, and even the same person says different things at different times. Three ways of life hold prominence: pleasure, the political, and the contemplative. Most choose a life belonging to fatted cattle. Refined people choose honor. Yet honor seems too superficial, residing in givers rather than the honored. People pursue honor to be convinced they are good. They seek to be honored by the wise for virtue. So virtue seems greater than honor as the political end. Yet even virtue seems incomplete if one might have it while asleep or suffering greatest misfortunes. The life of money-making is compulsory. Wealth is instrumental. Let these be put aside. It is better to examine the universal good. Yet inquiry becomes like trudging uphill because the men who introduced the forms were friends. Still, when keeping the truth safe is at stake, one's own must be abandoned. While both truth and friends are loved, it is sacred to give the higher honor to the truth. Good is meant in as many ways as being. There could not be any common good one and universal. Separating goods in themselves from useful things, one asks whether honor, good sense, and pleasure share one meaning of good, as whiteness and snow and lead paint. They do not. There is not any good shared under one form. Even if some separate good exists, it is not done or possessed by a human being, and that is what is sought. The argument that knowing the form would help us hit our good has plausibility, yet the doctor considers this particular person's health, not health in that way. Good in itself versus derivative. Some goods satisfy for their own sake. Others produce or preserve these. Good in a different derivative way. Quote, "While both the truth and one's friends are loved, it is a sacred thing to give the higher honor to the truth." Quote, "And it is impossible to say in what respect a weaver or a carpenter will be benefited in relation to his art by knowing this good itself, or how one who has beheld the form itself will be a better doctor or general. For it appears that the doctor does not consider health in that way, but the health of a human being, or perhaps rather that of this particular person, since he heals them each by each. Human ergon and happiness as being at work. Let's go back to the good being sought. In every action and choice the end is that for the sake of which everything else is done. If there is an end for all actions, this is the good belonging to action. Not all ends are complete. The highest good is something complete, chosen always for itself, never merely for something else. Happiness seems of this sort most of all. We choose honor, pleasure, and virtue also for happiness's sake, but no one chooses happiness for theirs. The same follows from self-sufficiency, not what suffices for a hermit, but also with parents, children, friends, and fellow citizens, since a human being is meant for a city. Happiness is the most choice-worthy while not counted among other goods. But what is happiness? This might come about if one grasps the work of a human being. As with a harpist, the good is in the work. Living is shared by plants, perceiving by animals. What remains is life, putting into action what has articulate speech, one aspect persuaded by reason, the other thinking through. One must set this down as being at work. If the work is a being at work of the soul in accordance with reason, and the serious person's work is the same in kind done well, the human good is disclosed as being at work of the soul in accordance with virtue, and if virtues are more than one, the best and most complete. This must be in a complete life. One swallow does not make a spring, nor one day a person blessed and happy. Let the good be sketched in outline. Precision must suit the material, as carpenter and geometrician both seek a right angle differently. Complete, Telian, an end pursued for its own sake, never merely instrumental. Wholeness as the root of teleology. Human ergon, being at work of the soul expressing articulate reason, not nutrition or mere perception. Quote, and happiness seems to be of this sort most of all, since we choose this always on account of itself, and never on account of anything else, while we choose honor and pleasure and intelligence, and every virtue indeed on account of themselves. For even if nothing resulted from them, we would choose each of them. But we choose them also for the sake of happiness, supposing that we will be happy by these means. But no one chooses happiness for the sake of these things, nor for the sake of anything else at all. Quote, if this is so, the human good comes to be disclosed as a being at work of the soul in accordance with virtue, and if the virtues are more than one, in accordance with the best and most complete virtue. But also, this must be in a complete life, for one swallow does not make a spring, nor one day, and in the same way one day or a short time does not make a person blessed and happy. External goods, Solon's saying, fortune of descendants. Good things divide into external and those associated with soul or body. Actions and ways of being at work belong to the soul, and the happy person lives and does well. Our statement gathers what people seek: virtue, practical judgment, wisdom, pleasure, external abundance, and neither ancient nor recent opinion is wholly mistaken. It matters whether the highest good is possession or use, an actively maintained condition or being at work. The condition may accomplish nothing in sleep, but being at work in accordance with virtue necessarily acts and acts well. As at the Olympics, those who compete are crowned, not the strongest who stay home. So those who act rightly become accomplished. Their life is pleasant in itself. Beautiful actions are pleasant to those devoted to the beautiful. Happiness is best, most beautiful, and most pleasant together. Nevertheless, external goods are needed to engage in beautiful actions. Friends, wealth, power as instruments. Lacking good children or looks disfigures blessedness. Happiness comes by virtue and learning, not chance alone, yet is widely shared among those capable of virtue. We do not call children or animals happy, since they cannot share in such being at work. But ought one call no living person happy, as Solon said to look at the end? If we must wait for death, can the dead be happy? Absurd if happiness is being at work? Yet fortunes of descendants seem to matter for the dead. Following fortune makes the same person happy and miserable in turns, a chameleon on rotten foundations. What governs happiness is being at work in accordance with virtue. Fortune is added, not constitutive. The happy person bears misfortune beautifully. Great reverses like Priam's limit blessedness without making one miserable. Call blessed those living in complete virtue with sufficient external goods for a complete life. Possession versus use. Happiness resides in being at work according to virtue, not merely holding virtue as a stored condition. Solon's impasse. The living cannot be judged finally happy, yet happiness as being at work cannot belong to the dead. Quote, for even if the actively maintained condition is present, it is possible for it to accomplish no good thing. For instance, in someone who is asleep or in someone who is incapacitated in some other way. But if the being at work is present, this is not possible, for necessarily the one who is at work in accordance with virtue will act and act well. Quote, so, is following up these fortunes not right at all? For what goes well or badly does not lie in them. But a human life has need of them as something added. As we said, while the things that govern happiness are ways of being at work in accordance with virtue, while opposite ways of being at work determine an opposite condition. Division of the soul, virtues of thinking and character. That descendants' fortunes have no influence seems too unfeeling. Yet what reaches the departed is faint, not enough to overturn blessedness. Happiness belongs among things honored, not praised. We bless the gods, and most godlike is happy, but praise the just for actions. Happiness is a source and end. Everything else is for its sake. Since happiness is being at work in accordance with complete virtue, one must examine virtue. The true political expert wants citizens good and obedient to laws. The inquiry belongs to human excellence of the soul. The political expert must study the soul as the eye doctor the body, for political concerns to the extent sufficient. Popular writings say adequately that the soul has an irrational part and a part having reason, whether distinct as bodily parts or inseparable in meaning like convex and concave makes no difference here. Within the irrational, the vegetative part, nutrition and growth, is most at work in sleep, when happy and miserable are least distinguishable. Leave it aside. Another part seems without reason, yet shares in reason. In the self-restrained and unrestrained, something battles reason, as spasming limbs swerve contrary to chosen movement. In the temperate and brave, all parts harmonize with reason. The appetitive part listens and obeys, as we call heeding one's father being rational, though not as mathematicians mean. Admonition shows the irrational is persuaded by reason. Having reason is twofold, governing reason and reason as listener. Virtue divides accordingly, wisdom, astuteness, practical judgment as intellectual virtues, generosity and temperance as virtues of character. Active condition, hexis, a stable disposition of the soul, praised when it orients toward beautiful action. Virtues of thinking and character. Intellectual excellences govern truth and deliberation. Excellences of character govern desires and actions. Quote, now some things about the soul are said in an adequate way even in popular writings, and one ought to make use of them. For example, that there is an irrational part of the soul and a part having reason. Quote, and virtue as well is divided in accordance with the same distinction. For we speak of virtues as pertaining either to thinking or to character, and speak of wisdom, astuteness, and practical judgment as intellectual virtues, and generosity and temperance as virtues of character. Book 2. Virtue and the mean. Habit, nature, and the two sorts of virtue. Book 2 opens by dividing virtue into two sorts, one pertaining to thinking and one to character. Excellence of thinking comes to be, for the most part, through teaching, experience, and time. Excellence of character comes into being as a consequence of habit, and even receives its name from habit by a small inflection of the vowel. Saxe's note warns that habit is only one necessary condition among natural capacity, training, and the deliberate contribution of the person who comes to have the virtue. Still, we become just by doing things that are just temperate by doing things that are temperate, and courageous by doing things that are courageous. What is by nature cannot be habituated to be otherwise. A stone could not be trained to fall upward, not even if thrown upward 10,000 times. The virtues come to be present neither by nature nor contrary to nature, but in us who are of such a nature as to take them on and to be brought to completion by means of habit. With the senses we had the potencies beforehand. With the virtues and the arts we take them on by first being at work in them. Lawmakers make citizens good by habituating them, and one regime differs from another as a good one from a worthless one according to whether it fulfills that intention. The same things from which every virtue comes into being are also those by which it is destroyed. Active states come into being from being at work in similar ways. It makes no small difference to be habituated this way or that straight from childhood, but an enormous difference, or rather all the difference. Excellence of thinking, for the most part a result of teaching, needing experience and time. Excellence of character comes into being through habit, neither by nature nor against nature. Quote, "Now since virtue is of two sorts, one pertaining to thinking and the other to character, excellence of thinking is for the most part, both in its coming to be and in its growth, a result of teaching, for which reason it has need of experience and time, while excellence of character comes into being as a consequence of habit, on account of which it even gets its name by small inflection from habit." Quote, "So too, we become just by doing things that are just temperate by doing things that are temperate, and courageous by doing things that are courageous. What happens in cities gives evidence of this, for lawmakers make the citizens good by habituating them. And since this is the intention of every lawmaker, those that do not do it well are failures, and one regime differs from another in this respect as a good one from a worthless one. The practical aim, and the same things that make and destroy. Since our present occupation is not for the sake of contemplation, for we are investigating not in order that we might know what virtue is, but in order that we might become good, it is necessary to investigate how one ought to perform the things involved in actions. Every discourse that concerns actions speaks in outline and not precisely, as matters of health have nothing rigidly fixed. Those who are acting must look at the circumstances themselves, as in medicine or steering a ship. The phrase, acting in accordance with right reason, may be set down. There will be a discussion later of what right reason is. Virtues are destroyed by deficiency and by excess. Excessive gymnastic exercises destroy strength, as deficient ones do. Someone who fears everything becomes a coward, while someone who fears nothing becomes rash. Temperance and courage are preserved by an intermediate condition, and it is in these same things that the being at work of the virtues will consist. By refraining from pleasures, we become temperate, and once temperate, we are most capable of refraining. By enduring frightening things, we become courageous. Quote, "Now since our present occupation is not for the sake of contemplation, as the other kinds of study are, for we are investigating not in order that we might know what virtue is, but in order that we might become good, since otherwise there would be no benefit from it, it is necessary to investigate with respect to the things involved in actions, how one ought to perform them, since these actions also determine the sorts of active states that come into being, as we have said, pleasure and pain as signs, the impasse of doing just actions. As a sign of the active states of one's soul, one must consider the pleasure or pain that accompanies one's deeds. Someone who refrains from bodily pleasures and delights in this is temperate, but someone who does so while feeling burdened is spoiled. Someone who endures terrifying things without being pained is courageous, but someone pained by them is a coward. Virtue of character is concerned with pleasures and pains, since on account of pleasure we perform base actions, and on account of pain we refrain from beautiful actions. It is necessary to be brought up straight from childhood, as Plato says, so as to take delight and feel pain in those things in which one ought. The good person is apt to go right concerning the beautiful, the advantageous, and the pleasant, but especially concerning pleasure. It is even harder to fight against pleasure than Heraclitus says it is to fight against anger, But artfulness and virtue always come to be concerned with what is more difficult. One might raise as an impasse how we become just by performing just actions. With the arts, the product's condition can suffice. With virtues, one does them justly only if the agent does them knowingly, having chosen them for their own sake, and being in a stable condition, not able to be moved all the way out of it. For having the virtues, knowing is of little strength. The other conditions arising from repeatedly performing just actions have all the power. Most people believe that by taking refuge in talk, they are philosophizing, like sick people who listen to doctors carefully but do none of the things they order. Quote, as a sign of the active states of one's soul, one must consider the pleasure or pain that accompanies one's deeds. For someone who refrains from bodily pleasures and delights in this very thing is temperate, but someone who does so while feeling burdened by it is spoiled, and someone who endures terrifying things and delights in them, or is at any rate not pained by them, is courageous, but someone who does so while being pained is a coward. Quote, it is well said, then, that by performing just actions one becomes a just person, and by performing temperate actions one becomes a temperate person, and no one is going to become good by not performing these actions. But most people do not perform them, but believe that by taking refuge in talk they are philosophizing, and in that way will be people of serious stature, doing something similar to those sick people who listen to the doctors carefully, but do none of the things they order. Active condition, the mean relative to us, and what virtue is. Virtue is an active condition, not a feeling or a predisposition. We are praised or blamed for virtues and vices, not simply for being afraid or angry, and virtues involve choice. Every virtue brings that of which it is the virtue to completion and makes it yield work of a good kind, as the excellence of the eye makes both the eye and its work first-rate. In everything continuous one can take more, less, or an equal measure, on account of the thing itself or in relation to us. The mean belonging to the thing is the same for everyone. The mean in relation to us is what neither goes too far nor falls short, and is not the same for everyone. If 10 pounds is a lot to eat and 2 a little, the trainer will not prescribe 6, a little to Milo, but a lot for the beginner. To feel pleasures and pains when, toward whom, for what reasons, and in the manner one ought, is both a mean and the best thing. It is possible to go wrong in many ways, but only one way to get something right. Virtue is an active condition apt at choosing, consisting in a mean condition in relation to us, determined by the means by which a person with practical judgment would determine it, a mean between two vices, one from excess and one from deficiency. Yet not every action admits of a mean. Adultery and murder are base in themselves. Courage is not a position on the scale of fear. It is a condition in which actions can be freely chosen without being determined by fear. Mean in relation to us, what neither goes too far nor falls short for the agent concerned. Quote, therefore, virtue is an active condition that makes one apt at choosing, consisting in a mean condition in relation to us, which is determined by a proportion and by the means by which a person with practical judgment would determine it. And it is a mean condition between two vices, one resulting from excess and the other from deficiency, and is also a mean in the sense that the vices of the one sort fall short, and those of the other sort go beyond what is appropriate both in feelings and in actions, while virtue both discovers and chooses the mean. The catalog of means and how to hit the mean. It is necessary to apply the account to particulars. Concerning fear and confidence, the mean is courage. Excess in confidence is rashness. Excess in fear is cowardice. Concerning pleasures, temperance is the mean and dissipation the excess. Concerning money, generosity lies between wastefulness and stinginess. Magnificence governs great expenditures. Greatness of soul governs honor. Gentleness is the mean concerning anger. Truthfulness, charm, and friendliness are means concerning truth, playfulness, and pleasantness in life. The extremes are opposite both to the mean and to one another. The courageous person appears rash to the coward and cowardly to the rash. It is work to be of serious moral stature, since in each kind of thing it is work to get hold of the mean. The one who aims at the mean ought first to pull back from what is more contrary to it, as Calypso advises. Since to hit the mean with extreme precision is difficult, one ought to take the least of the evils. Consider what we ourselves are carried away toward and drag ourselves toward the opposite side, as when straightening warped lumber. Guard most against pleasure, for we do not judge it without bribes. The person who deviates a little from what is done well is not blamed. At what point one is to be blamed is not easy to determine by formulation, for the judgment is in the perceiving. While the mean is praised in all things, one ought sometimes to incline away from it toward excess or deficiency, for in that way we shall most easily hit the mark of what is done well. Quote, hence the one who aims at the mean ought first to pull back from what is more contrary to it. Just as Calypso advises, keep the ship out beyond that thick spray and swell, for of the extremes the one is a greater error, the other a lesser. Since then, to hit the mean with extreme precision is a difficult thing, as the second best way to sail, as people say, one ought to take the least of the evils, and this will be most the case in the way which we are speaking of. Quote, therefore this much is clear, that while the mean active condition is praised in all things, one ought to incline away from it sometimes toward the excess and sometimes toward the deficiency, for in that way we shall most easily hit the mark of the mean and of what is done well. Book 3. Responsibility and the Primary Virtues of Character. Willing and Unwilling Action. Book 3 opens where the inquiry into virtue must open for anyone who legislates or judges character. Since praise and blame attach to willing actions, while unwilling ones receive forgiveness and sometimes pity, one must distinguish what is done willingly from what is not. An unwilling act, in the primary sense, happens by force or through ignorance. Force means the source of the motion lies outside the agent, who contributes nothing, as when a wind carries one off. Ignorance of particulars, not of the universal good, earns pity, who is acting, what is being done, with what instrument, for the sake of what end, and in what manner. These must be known for an act to count as fully willing. Merope, supposing her son an enemy. Aeschylus, not knowing he revealed mysteries. These illustrate ignorance of circumstance, not of moral principle. One might raise as an impasse about actions done through fear of greater evils, or for the sake of something beautiful. If a tyrant orders a shameful deed on pain of one's parent's death, is the deed willing? Such cases are mixed, yet more like willing acts, since at the time the agent prefers the deed and the end accords with the occasion. The source of the moving of the instrumental parts lies in oneself. What has its source in oneself is up to oneself. Throwing cargo overboard in a storm is not done simply willingly, yet sailors with sense do it for safety and at the moment prefer it. Still, one who endures what is exceedingly shameful for no beautiful object shows low moral stature. Some things one ought to die rather than do. Against those who call pleasant or beautiful things sources of compulsion, Aristotle replies that then everything would be forced. Those compelled act with pain. Those acting for the pleasant or beautiful act with pleasure. What is done on account of ignorance is not willing when the agent is pained and regrets it. Yet one who acts in ignorance without distress has not acted willingly, but neither unwillingly. The non-willing needs a special name. Acting on account of ignorance differs from acting while being ignorant. The drunk acts on account of the state. Unwillingness does not cover ignorance of what is advantageous. That belongs to depravity. Acts from spiritedness or desire are not rightly called unwilling. If they were, neither children nor animals would act willingly, and it would be ridiculous to call shameful acts unwilling when one thing causes both beautiful and shameful outcomes. Unwilling acts seem painful. Those from desire are pleasant. Actions from spiritedness and desire belong to the human, being no less than those from reasoning. Willing act. The source is in oneself when one knows the particular circumstances of the action. Unwilling act. Done by force or on account of ignorance of particulars, with pain and regret afterward. Mixed act. Chosen in present circumstances for a particular end. More like willing, since actions are in the particulars. Quote, since an unwilling act is one that is done by force or on account of ignorance, a willing act would seem to be one of which the source is in oneself, when one knows the particular circumstances in which the action takes place. Quote, such actions, then, are mixed, but they are more like willing acts, since at the time when they are done they are preferred, and the end for which an action takes place is in accordance with its occasion. So one has to say what is willing or unwilling at the time when someone does it. Choice, deliberation, and wishing. Now that willing and unwilling acts have been distinguished, the inquiry turns to choice, proeresis, which belongs most properly to virtue and determines character more than isolated actions. Choice is willing, but willing covers more. Children and animals act willingly, but do not choose. Spur-of-the-moment deeds are willing, but not chosen. Choice is not desire, spiritedness, wishing, or opinion. The person lacking self-control desires, but does not choose. The self-controlled person chooses without desiring. One may wish for impossible things, or for what is not up to oneself, but one chooses only what one believes could come about by one's own act. Wishing is for the end. Choice is of means. By choosing good or bad things, we are certain kinds of people. Not so by having opinions. Choice is something willing that has been deliberated about first. Its name hints at taking beforehand. We deliberate not about everlasting things, necessity, chance, or foreign governance, but about what is up to us and his action. Nor about ends, but about means. The doctor does not deliberate whether to cure, but how. One traces back from end to first responsible cause, the last in discovery, first in acting, as analysis in geometry reverses into synthesis. Deliberation is inquiry, though not all inquiry is deliberation. What is deliberated and chosen are the same, except the chosen is determined, when each stops tracing the source back to oneself and the leading part. Choice is deliberate desire of things up to us. Wishing is for the end, the good simply, or the apparent good. If simply the good, the bad person's wish is no wish. If the apparent, nothing is by nature wished. The resolution, simply the good is wished, but for each the apparent good. To the serious person what is truly good, to the flighty any random thing, as health truly is healthy for sound bodies, but seems otherwise to the sick. The serious person discerns correctly and is measure of the beautiful and pleasant. Pleasure distorts most people's judgment. Hence virtue and vice are up to us. Lawgivers punish acts not done by force or excusable ignorance, and honor beautiful deeds. They punish ignorance when the ignorant are responsible, as when penalties double for the drunk. One becomes unjust or dissipated by the ways of being at work in dishonest or dissipated conduct. Conditions come from being at work. At the beginning, it was in one's power not to become so. Once formed, one cannot wish the condition away, as one cannot recall a thrown rock. Though to have thrown, it was up to oneself, since the source was within. One might object that each aims at the apparent good and does not control appearances, needing to be born with something like moral vision. But if each is in some way responsible for one's active condition through the care one takes, each is in some way responsible for how things appear. Virtue is no more willing than vice. The virtues are mean active conditions, up to us and willing. We control actions throughout, but of conditions only the beginnings. Choice, deliberate desire of things up to us, not identical with willing, desire, wishing, or opinion. Deliberation, about means to ends among things up to us, not about ends or what lies outside action. Wishing, for the end, the good simply for the serious person, the apparent good for each as he is. Quote, since among the things that are up to us, the desired thing that has been deliberated upon is what is chosen. Choice would be the deliberate desire of things that are up to us, for having decided as a result of deliberating, we desire in accordance with our deliberation. Quote, to say that no one is willingly wretched or unwillingly happy seems to be partly false and partly true, for no one is happy unwillingly, but baseness is something willing. Either that or one ought to dispute the things that were just now said and assert that human being is not a source and begetter of actions just as much as of children. Courage, mean, paradigm, and counterfeits. Aristotle begins with courage, a mean concerning fear and confidence. Fear is expectation of something bad. We fear poverty, disease, loss of friends, death, but the courageous person is not concerned with all of these. One ought to fear loss of reputation. Shamelessness there only resembles courage. Death is most frightening, since it is a limit beyond which nothing is good or bad for the dead. Yet courage in a governing sense is not concerned with death at sea or in illness, but with death in the most beautiful circumstances, above all in war, where the greatest and most beautiful danger occurs and cities bestow honors. While some things frighten everyone with sense, others differ in magnitude. The courageous endure as one ought and in proportion, for the sake of the beautiful. For this is the end belonging to virtue, and each thing is determined by its end. The rash exceed in confidence, pretends cowards in the midst of danger. Cowards exceed in fear. Courage endures because it is beautiful or shameful not to escape poverty or pain, for fleeing distress is softness. 5 other things are called courage. Civic courage, from shame, honor, craving for the beautiful, most resembles true courage, as in Homer's Hector and Diomedes. Forced courage, like men beaten back into battle or stationed beside trenches, acts from fear of pain, not shame. One ought not be brave by compulsion, but because it is beautiful. Experienced soldiers appear brave, knowing war's empty threats, but run when danger strains too far, while citizen armies die holding ground because flight would be shameful. Spiritedness stirs toward danger as Homer's warrior's blood seethes. Yet wild animals rush from pain, not for the beautiful. Lust drives adulterers to daring without reason's determination. Confidence from repeated victory, drunken hope, and ignorance of danger hold only until things prove otherwise, as when Argives mistook Spartans for Sicyonians and fled. True courage endures what is and appears frightening because it is beautiful. It shows most in sudden frights, where less calculation intervenes and the soul's active condition speaks plainly. Courage is painful and justly praised, since enduring pain is harder than refraining from pleasure. Death and wounds pain even the courageous, who endure them unwillingly yet for the beautiful. The end is pleasant but blocked from sight, as the boxer's crown seems nothing beside the blows. Courage, governing sense, mean concerning fear and confidence, enduring for the beautiful, especially death in war. Rashness, excess of confidence, pretense collapsing in real danger. Cowardice, excess of fear, faint hope. Quote, so one who endures or fears what one ought for the reason one ought, as one ought, when one ought, and is confident in similar ways, is courageous, since the courageous person undergoes things and acts in accordance with what is worthy and in a way that is proportionate. Quote, courage, then, is a thing of this sort, but there are also other things that are called courage in 5 ways. First, there is an active condition that comes from citizenship, since it is most like courage. For citizens seem to endure dangers on account of the penalties that come from the laws and reproaches and on account of honors. Temperance, dissipation, and the bodily desires. Temperance and dissipation concern pleasures of the irrational soul, mean and excess, especially bodily. Not every pleasure, honor, learning, talkativeness, grief over possessions do not name the temperate or dissipated, nor pleasures of sight or hearing as such, except when perfumes recall, yearn for objects. Temperance concerns pleasures animals share, touch and taste, especially enjoyment through touch and food, drink, and sex. Hence dissipation is most reproached, present insofar as we are animals. Desire for food is natural in every being that needs nourishment. Youth naturally desires sex, as Homer says, but particular preferences vary. In natural desires, few go wrong, and only toward excess, as with those who fill the belly beyond need. In particular, pleasures many err in many ways, delighting in what one ought not, or more than one ought, or more than most. And the dissipated exceeds in all. Concerning pains, temperance differs from courage. The dissipated is pained by missing pleasures and by desiring them. Since desire itself involves pain, the temperate is not pained at abstention. Insensitivity to pleasure is barely human and rarely found. The temperate is in a mean, disdaining what the dissipated enjoys most, not greatly pleased by what one ought not, feeling little pain or desire at absence. He desires moderately pleasures leading to health, not contrary to the beautiful, not beyond his resources. Dissipation seems more willing than cowardice, since cowardice flees pain while dissipation chooses pleasure, and pain deranges one while pleasure does not. Hence dissipation is more reproached, and pleasures abound for easy habituation. Yet particular dissipated acts are willing, done from yearning, while the whole condition is less so, since no one desires to be dissipated. The word extends to spoiled children. Acholasia means unpruned, undisciplined. Desire in youth is insatiable, and if not brought under a ruler, grows strong and knocks reasoning out of commission. The temperate person's desiring part harmonizes with reason. Both look to the beautiful, and he desires what one ought, as one ought, when one ought. Temperance mean concerning bodily pleasures of touch and taste, not pain by rightful abstention. Dissipation, excess in object, degree, or manner of bodily pleasure. Most animal-like vice. Harmony with reason. The desiring part obeys reason as a child a tutor, until understanding governs. Quote, temperance and dissipation are concerned with pleasures of this sort, which the rest of the animals share in, which is why these pleasures have a slavish and animal-like look, and they are touch and taste. Quote, hence it is necessary for desires to be moderate and few, and not opposed to reason. Such a condition as we call obedient and disciplined. And just as a child needs to live by the instructions of a tutor, so too is the desiring part of the soul related to reason. This is why the desiring part of a temperate person needs to be in harmony with reason. For the aim to which both look is the beautiful, and the temperate person desires what one ought, as one ought, when one ought, which is what reason also prescribes. Book 4. Other Virtues of Character. Book 4 extends the catalog of virtues of character beyond courage and temperance into money, honor, anger, and the ordinary commerce of social life. Aristotle sets forth received opinions about generosity, magnificence, greatness of soul, and the unnamed means governing anger and conversation, then refines them by distinguishing excess and deficiency in giving and getting, in self-assessment, and in the pleasures and pains that arise among associates. What emerges is a progressively sharpened picture of how the mean active condition shows itself in great expenditures and small, in the claim to honor and the refusal of flattery, and finally in shame, a quasi-virtue proper to the young rather than to the fully formed character. Generosity, wastefulness, and stinginess. Generosity is the mean condition concerning money, praised in giving and getting rather than in war, temperance, or legal judgment. Wealth consists of things to be used. The generous person uses it best because he has the virtue connected with money, and using money, in the relevant sense, is spending and giving rather than acquisition. It is more characteristic of generosity to give to whom one ought than to get from whom one ought, since acting well and doing beautiful things go with giving. The generous person gives for the sake of the beautiful, to whom, as much as, and when one ought, with pleasure or without pain, he does not take from where one ought not, nor ask readily for benefits. Generosity is relative to means. Someone who gives less may be the more generous if he gives out of smaller supply. It is characteristic of generosity to go to excess in giving so that less remains for oneself. Yet the virtue is also bounded. One who spent on unfitting objects would lack means for what one ought. Wastefulness goes to excess in giving and falls short in getting. Stinginess falls short in giving and goes to excess in getting, often in small ways. The pure wasteful person who gives everywhere and takes from nowhere is uncommon and may seem better off than the stingy, for he is curable by age and poverty, and has something of the generous in him, though in neither respect as one ought. Most wasteful people also take from where they ought not, driven by the wish to spend when their own means run out. Because they give no consideration to the beautiful, their giving is not generous. Stinginess is incurable and more innate, for most love money more than giving. Its forms are many. Some merely fall short in giving without yearning after others' goods. Others take by shameful means. Loan sharks, pimps, gamblers, enduring reproach for small gain. Tyrants who plunder cities are corrupt and unjust, not stingy, since stinginess concerns small gains endured with reproach. A generous person is easy to deal with about money and capable of being cheated, more bothered about not having spent what one ought than pained about having spent what one ought not. Generosity, the mean concerning giving and getting money, measured by the giver's disposition relative to means. Giving for the sake of the beautiful is more central than acquisition. Quote, actions in accord with virtue are beautiful and are for the sake of the beautiful. The generous person, then, will give for the sake of the beautiful, and in the right way, for it goes along with right giving that it be to whom, and as much as and when one ought, and as many other qualifications as apply. And it involves doing these things with pleasure or without pain, for what comes from virtue is pleasant or painless. Least of all things is it painful. Quote, so the kinds that go together come into being together in the same person, while the kinds that are contrary to one another clearly cannot. And if it happens to a generous person to spend money in a way counter to what is right and beautiful, he will be pained by it, but moderately and as one ought, since it belongs to virtue also to be pleased and pained at what one ought and as one ought. Magnificence. Magnificence concerns lavish expenditures on something great and conspicuous. Not all money matters as generosity does. Magnitude is relative. Fitting expense for a worship patron differs from that for a civic delegation. One who often gives to beggars proportionally is generous, but not magnificent. The magnificent person contemplates what is fitting and spends great amounts harmoniously. The work must be worthy of the expense and the expense of the work, or exceed it. He spends for the beautiful, without chintzy accounting, on offerings and temples, choruses, worships, civic feasts, outlays worthy of the person and his means. A poor person who tries magnificence is foolish. He is lavish on things shared in common, not on himself. His gifts resemble offerings to the gods. The vulgar person overdoes small occasions for display. The chintzy person spoils beauty over trifles. These vices bring little reproach, since they harm neighbors little. Magnificence. Great and fitting expenditure on honorable works in proportion to the spender's worth. A work's excellence is in grandeur and beauty, not in the highest price of a possession. Quote, for just as we said at the start, an active condition is determined by ways of being at work and by those things with which the activities are involved. Now the expenditures of a magnificent person are great and fitting, and so are his works, for in that way the great amount spent will also be appropriate to the work. And so the work must be worthy of the expense, and the expense must be worthy of the work, or even exceed it. Quote, and the excellence of a work is not the same as that of a possession, since a possession that is worth the highest price, such as gold, is the most valued, but the work that is valued most is one that is great and beautiful, for the contemplation of such a thing is wondrous, and what is magnificent is wondrous, and the excellence of a work, its magnificence, is in its grandeur. Greatness of soul and the mean of honor. Greatness of soul concerns great things. The great-souled person considers himself worthy of great things, and is worthy. One who does so beyond his worth is vain. One who falls short is small-souled. He is an extreme by magnitude, but a mean in assessing himself as one ought. Honor, the greatest external good and prize for the most beautiful deeds, is his primary concern. If worthy of the greatest honors, he must be best, for the better is worthy of more. Greatness of soul adorns the virtues, making them greater without coming about apart from them. It is difficult to be truly great-souled without the beauty of goodness. He is moderately pleased at great honors from serious people, as hitting the mark or less than due, since no honor equals complete virtue. He disdains honor from random people or for trifles. He is neither overjoyed in good fortune nor crushed in bad, for even honor is small to one to whom nothing is great, hence the appearance of arrogance. Those with fortune but without virtue mimic him unjustly, looking down on others without doing what comes for virtue, while the truly great-souled look down justly, holding opinion truly. Fortune contributes to the appearance of greatness of soul, since the well-born and powerful are honored, but only the good are honorably so in truth. He takes great risks without regard for life when life is not worth living on any terms, does favors but is ashamed to receive them, remembering benefits given rather than received, as Thetis did not tell Zeus her favors nor the Spartans theirs to Athens, asks help reluctantly, is high-handed toward the great and moderate toward the middle, slow to act except for great honor or deed, open in love and hatred, truthful except when ironically toward ordinary people, incapable of leading life to suit anyone but a friend, possesses beautiful useless things rather than merely productive ones, moving slowly with deep voice and steady speech. A parallel, unnamed, mean concerns moderate honor, as generosity to magnificence. Excess is passion for honor. Deficiency is neglect of honor even for beautiful acts. Small-souled and vain people err without the harm of full vice. Smallness of soul is worse and more common than vanity. Greatness of soul, worthiness of great things joined to accurate self-assessment, centered on honor, yet treating honor as small against complete virtue. Quote, greatness of soul, then, seems to be a certain kind of adornment of the virtues, since it makes them greater and does not come about without them. For this reason, it is difficult to be great-souled in truth, for it is not possible without the beauty that belongs to goodness. Quote, a great-souled person, because he holds few things in high honor, is not someone who takes small risks or is passionately devoted to taking risks, but he is someone who takes great risks, and when he does take a risk, he is without regard for his life, on the ground that it is not on just any terms that life is worth living. And he is the sort of person who does favors, but is ashamed to have them done for him, since the former belongs to one who is superior, but the latter to one who has someone superior to him. Gentleness. Gentleness is the mean concerning anger, nameless like its extremes, though the word inclines toward deficiency. One angered at what, whom, when, and as long as one ought is praised. The gentle person is undisturbed yet severe as reason prescribes, more apt to forgive than to revenge. Deficiency is blamed, not getting angry when one ought seems foolish and slavish, for holding back when foully insulted or overlooking harm to those close is not free. Excess takes many forms. Irritable people anger quickly but stop quickly. Hot-headed people are sharp toward everything. Bitter people hold rage long and are most troublesome to themselves and those dear. Harsh people treat others severely on wrong grounds and reconcile only with revenge. Not all at once, for complete excess would be unbearable. The excess is more opposite to gentleness and worse to live with, for it is more human to take revenge. As Aristotle noted earlier about anger, it is not easy to determine how, with whom, in what circumstances, and for how long one ought to be angry. The judgment is in the perceiving of particulars, and slight deviations escape blame. Quote, now someone who is angered at things and at people one ought to be angered at, and also, as and when, and for as long as one ought to be, is praised. So this would be a gentle person, if in fact gentleness is praised. For a gentle person means someone who is undisturbed and not led by his passions, but who becomes severe in the way, and in those circumstances, and for as long a time as reason prescribes. Quote, but this much is clear at any rate, that the mean active condition is praised, in accord with which we get angry with the people whom one ought to get angry with on the grounds on which one ought, as one ought, and all such things, while the kinds of excess and deficiency are blamed, to a small extent when they occur slightly, to a greater extent when they occur more, and to a great extent when they occur to a considerable degree. Truthfulness, friendliness, and wit in social life. 3. Nameless means governs social words and deeds. Friendliness avoids obsequiousness, complimenting everything to please, and contrariness, objecting without regard for pain. The mean accepts what one ought, as one ought, most like friendship but without affection. Such a person associates for the beautiful and advantageous, joining pleasure when fitting and sometimes giving small pain for great pleasure later. The obsequious join pleasures to be pleasant. Flatterers do so for gain. The contrary keep hands off common pleasures. Truthfulness in speech and life apart from contracts calls each thing by its right name. One passionately devoted to truth, even when it makes no difference, will be truthful still more when it does. The braggart claims more than is his for reputation or gain, the latter more disgraceful. The ironist understates, as Socrates did, appearing gracious though denying obvious small goods can itself be boastful, like Spartan clothes. The braggart is worse than the ironist. In relaxation, buffoons are crude for a laugh, sparing neither themselves nor others. Boorish people disdain wit and contribute nothing. Charming people are readily flexible, for playfulness shows character as motion shows the body. Old and new comedy differ. Foul language versus subtlety. Whether wit is defined by appropriateness to a generous spirit or by not causing pain varies with hearers. A joke is a kind of slander, and the gracious person is like a law to himself. Relaxation is necessary. The 3 means differ. 1 concerns truth, 2 concern pleasure in play and in the rest of life. Friendliness. The mean in social acceptance without the affection of full friendship. Truthfulness. The mean between bragging and irony in presenting oneself. Wit. The mean between buffoonery and boorishness in playful speech. Quote, in general, then, it was said that such a person will associate with people in the way one ought, and, having reference to what is beautiful and what is advantageous, will aim either at not causing them pain or at joining in their pleasure. For such a person seems to be concerned with pleasures and pains that turn up in social relations. Quote, by itself, what is false is base and blamable, and what is true is beautiful and to be praised. So too, the truthful person, who is the mean, is praised, while both kinds of deceptive people are blamed, but more so the braggart. Quote, but those who are playful in a harmonious way are called charming, as being readily flexible, for such acts seem to be motions that come from one's character, and just as bodies are judged by their ways of moving, so too are people's characters. Shame as quasi-virtue. Shame is not appropriately called a virtue, for it seems more a feeling than an active condition, a fear of bad reputation akin to fear of death, with bodily signs that belong to feeling rather than deliberate character. It fits only the young, who live by feeling and need holding back. We praise shame in youth, but not in the old, who ought not do what shame concerns. Shame does not belong to decent people for base acts, since they ought not do them. It belongs to the base to do shameful things. To think one's self decent, because one would be ashamed if one did base acts, is absurd. Shame is for willing acts, but the decent person never willingly does base things. Shame could be decent only hypothetically. Shamelessness is base, yet being ashamed does not make one decent. Self-restraint, too, is not virtue but something mixed, a topic for later. The inquiry now turns to justice. Quote, it is not appropriate to speak about a sense of shame as if it were a virtue, for it seems more like a feeling than like an active condition. It is defined, at any rate, as a certain kind of fear of a bad reputation, and it ends up being pretty much the same as a fear concerned with terrifying things. For people who are ashamed blush, while those who are afraid of death turn pale. Quote, for shame does not belong to decent people, if it comes about for base acts, since one ought not to do such things, and if some things are truly shameful, while others are so according to opinion, it makes no difference, since neither sort ought to be done, and so shame ought not to be felt. And it belongs to someone base to be the sort of person to do any of the things that are shameful. Book v. Justice. Book v. inquires what sort of actions justice and injustice concern, what mean condition justice is, and what something just is a mean between, along the same line as the preceding discussions. Everyone intends justice to mean the active condition from which people perform just actions and want what is just. Injustice is the opposite. Yet, justice and injustice are meant in more than one sense, and their ambiguity lies between meanings close together, not so obvious as when the same word names a door latch and a collarbone. Complete virtue toward another. The lawbreaker seems unjust, and so does someone greedy and inequitable. The law-abiding and equitable person seems just. What is just is lawful and equitable. The unjust person is greedy for goods and bads of fortune. Always good simply, though not always good for a particular person. Human beings pray for these when they ought to pray that what is good simply be good also for them. The unjust person does not always take the larger share. In things simply bad, he may take the smaller, because the lesser evil seems a kind of good. Everything lawful is in some way just, for laws speak publicly about everything and aim at the common advantage, or the advantage of the best or of those in charge, in a manner determined by virtue. What produces and preserves happiness or its parts in the political community is just in this sense. The law also orders the deeds of a courageous, temperate, and gentle person, commanding the virtues and forbidding the vices, rightly when laid down rightly, worse when tossed off carelessly. This sort of justice, then, is complete virtue, though not simply but in relation to someone else. Hence it often seems the greatest of the virtues. Neither evening's nor dawn's light is so wondrous, and proverbially in justice all virtue is together in one. It especially is complete because it is the putting to use of complete virtue, and because the one who has it can use it in relation to someone else, not only among those at home, but unable to do so only in domestic situations. Bias seems well said. Ruling will reveal a man, since one who rules is involved with another from the start. Justice alone among the virtues seems someone else's good, because one does things advantageous to another, to one who rules or partakes in the community. The worst person uses vice toward himself and his friends. The best uses virtue toward someone else, not toward himself, a difficult task. This justice is not a part of virtue, but the whole. The injustice opposite is the whole of vice. Virtue and this justice are the same thing, but what it is to be each is not the same. Insofar as related to another, justice. Insofar as an active condition of the soul, virtue. Complete justice, the lawful and equitable use of whole virtue in relation to another. Virtue as exercised toward the political community. Quote, this sort of justice, then, is complete virtue, though not simply but in relation to someone else. And for this reason, it often seems that justice is the greatest of the virtues, and neither evening's nor dawn's light is so wondrous. And we say proverbially, in justice all virtue is together in one. Quote, but for this same reason, justice alone among the virtues seems to be someone else's good, because it is in relation to someone else, for one does things that are advantageous to another person, either to one who rules or to one who partakes in the community. Particular justice and its two forms. But we inquire about justice as a part of virtue and particular injustice. With other vices, one may act unjustly without taking more than one's due. When someone takes more, it is often from injustice as a part, not from cowardice or stinginess. If one commits adultery for profit while another pays from desire, the former is unjust, the latter dissipated. Injustice comes from making the profit. Particular injustice concerns honor, money, safety, or what includes these, for gain, while complete injustice concerns everything a serious person is serious about. The unjust divides into unlawful and inequitable. Inequitable and unlawful differ as part from whole. Let complete justice be set aside. One partial form distributes honor, money, and divisible goods among sharers in the political community. Another sets things straight in willing and unwilling transactions. Since the unjust person is inequitable and what is unjust is inequitable, There's a mean in relation to what is inequitable. What is equitable? What is just is equitable. An equal amount is a mean. What is just, in least terms, has to be in four things. Two people in relation to whom it is just, and two things in which it is present. The same relation between the things as between the people will be the equality. If people are not equal, they will not have equal things. From that source come fights and complaints whenever equals have unequal shares or unequals equal ones. All agree that what is just in distributions must be in accord with some sort of merit. Though Democrats mean freedom, oligarchs wealth, others being well-born, aristocrats virtue. Justice is a certain proportion. Proportionality is equality of ratios. What is just in distribution links people and shares in geometrical proportion. What is unjust is disproportionate, and the unjust person has more of something good, while the one who suffers injustice has less. The remaining form sets things straight in willing and unwilling transactions, with a different form from distributive justice. Corrective justice is equitable but follows arithmetic proportion, not geometrical. Quote, also, this is clear from what is in accord with merit, for all people agree that what is just in distributions must be in accord with some sort of merit, although not all people mean the same thing by merit. But those who favor democracy mean freedom, those who favor oligarchy mean wealth, others mean being well-born, and those who favor aristocracy mean virtue. Justice, therefore, is a certain kind of proportion. Quote, so the judge tries to equalize what is unjust in this sense, since it is an inequality. For whenever one person has been wounded and another has caused the wound, or one person has committed murder and another has been murdered, the suffering and the doing are divided unequally, but the judge tries, by means of the penalty, to make things equal, taking away the gain. Reciprocity, exchange, and money. To some, reciprocity is simply just, as the Pythagoreans held, yet it fits neither distributive nor corrective justice. Rhadamanthus's rule, suffer what one did, sounds wrong when authority strikes or is struck. Yet in exchange, reciprocal justice by proportionality holds the city together. People pay back good or evil, and without reciprocity, there is no community. Hence the temple of the graces by the roadway. Linking along the diagonal makes reciprocal exchange proportionate. House builder, leather worker, house, shoe. Proportional equality must be worked out before exchange, or the parties do not stay together. A community does not arise between two doctors, but between a doctor and a farmer. People who are different and unequal need to be equalized for exchange. All things of which there is exchange must be comparable. Currency was brought in and becomes in a certain way a mean, measuring all things in their excess and deficiency. Need holds everything together. By conventional agreement, currency became a substitute for need. It has the name because it is not natural, but by current custom. Products must be put into proportionality, while people still have their own products, or one extreme gets both excesses. Doing what is just is a mean between doing injustice and having injustice done to one. Justice is a mean condition, but not as the other virtues are. It is concerned with a mean quantity, while injustice is concerned with extremes. The just person distributes by choice, so that each gets what is proportionally equal. Quote, and linking things up along the diagonal makes reciprocal exchange be proportionate. Take a house builder, a leatherworker B, a house C, and a shoe D. What is needed, then, is for the house builder to get the leatherworker's product from him, and himself give him in exchange his own product. Now, if a proportional equality is worked out first, and then a reciprocal exchange takes place, what was described will be the case. But if it is not worked out, the exchange is not equal, and the parties do not stay together. Quote, hence, all things ought to be valued in currency, for in this way there will always be exchange, and if this, then also a shared community. So the currency, like a unit of measure, equalizes things by making them commensurable, for there would be no community if there were not exchange, and no exchange if there were not equality, and no equality if there were not commensurability. Political justice, natural and legal. Since one may do injustice without yet being unjust, passion may drive adultery, though choice does not. What is sought is what is just in political life. among those who share a life aiming at self-sufficiency, free and equal either proportionally or numerically. Where this does not hold, there is no political justice, but something just by likeness, for those for whom there is law and injustice, and judgment discriminates just from unjust. We do not allow a human being to rule, but the law, because a human being does this for himself and becomes a tyrant. The ruler is guardian of what is equal. If just, he labors for another. Hence justice is called someone else's good, and honor compensates those for whom that is not enough. What is just for master or father is similar, but not the same. There is no injustice in the simple sense toward what is one's own. A child or piece of property is like a part of oneself until independent. Hence no political justice or injustice toward oneself. Of political justice, one kind is natural, another conventional. What is naturally just has the same power everywhere. What is conventionally just at first makes no difference either way, but once established does. Ransom of 1 mina, sacrificing a goat, not 2 sheep. Some think all justice conventional, because what is just changes. Yet the right hand is stronger by nature, though one may become ambidextrous. Conventional justice is like measuring units for wine, not equal everywhere. Each lawful, just thing is a universal over particulars. An act of injustice differs from what is unjust. One acts justly or unjustly when willing, knowing whom, with what, for what end. Harms from ignorance are mistakes. From choice, the person is unjust. Acts from spiritedness are beautifully judged, not from forethought. The dispute concerns justice, not the fact. Quote, of the political sort of justice, one kind is natural and another is conventional. What is naturally just has the same power everywhere, and is not affected by whether it seems so to people or not, but what is conventionally just is something that at first makes no difference to do this way or some other way, but when people have established it, does make a difference. Quote, hence it is beautifully judged that acts that arise out of spiritedness are not from forethought, for it is not the one who acts with spirit who is the source of it, but the one who made him angry. Moreover, what is in dispute does not concern what did or did not happen, but the justice of it, since the anger is occasioned by an apparent injustice. Decency and the limits of universal law. Concerning decency and what is decent, how decency is related to justice. They appear neither simply the same nor different in kind. Sometimes we praise a decent act in place of good. Sometimes it seems absurd if the decent is praised despite being aside from a just. The impasse follows from reasons all correct in a certain way. The decent thing, though better than a certain kind of just thing, is just, and is not better than what is just by being of another kind. The same thing is just and decent. Both are of serious worth, but what is decent is superior. While what is decent is just, it is not so according to the law, but is a setting straight of what is legally just. Every law is universal, and some things cannot be spoken rightly when speaking universally. Where one must speak universally but cannot speak rightly, the law takes what applies to the greater number, not failing to recognize the error. Nonetheless right, for the error is not in the law or lawmaker, but in the nature of the particular case. When a law speaks universally, but what turns out lies outside what was said universally, it is right to set straight what was left out, which the lawmaker would say if present, and would have put in the law had he known. Decency is better than the error from speaking simply. Not all things are in accord with law, because some cannot be legislated. There is need of a decree. A rule for something indeterminate is indeterminate, as the lead straightedge on Lesbos, altered to fit the stone, not rigid. The decent person is inclined to take less even when the law supports more. Decency is a certain kind of justice, not a different active condition. Quote, it produces an impasse because, while what is decent is just, it is not so according to the law, but is a setting straight of what is legally just. The reason is that every law is universal, and there are some things about which it is not possible to speak rightly when speaking universally. Quote, for a rule for something indeterminate is also indeterminate, as is the lead straightedge used in house building on Lesbos. For the ruler is altered to fit the shape of the stone and does not stay rigid. and the decree is altered to fit the circumstances. Injustice to oneself and the impasses of suffering wrong. One might raise as an impasse whether suffering injustice can be willing, since doing injustice is always willing. Euripides absurdly asks whether a son killed his mother willingly, yet acting justly is willing. Must suffering mirror acting? Doing unjust things differs from doing injustice. If harming willingly defines injustice, the unrestrained could wrong themselves, an impasse. Add, against that person's wishes, no one willingly has injustice done to him. Glaucus exchanging gold for bronze does not suffer injustice, since giving is up to him while having injustice done is not. Does the distributor who gives another more than himself wrong himself? The giver may gain reputation or beauty and suffers nothing contrary to his wishes. The source of action is in the giver. Whether one can be unjust to oneself is evident from what has been said. The law does not condone killing oneself. One who cuts his own throat willingly, outside what law permits, is unjust. But to whom? To the city, not himself. He undergoes it willingly, but no one has injustice done willingly. Hence the city penalizes self-destruction. By the act through which one is merely unjust and not vicious overall, one cannot be unjust to oneself. The same thing could not be subtracted from and added to itself. Injustice is willing, from choice, and prior in time. But acting on oneself, one suffers and does at once. No one commits adultery with his own wife or steals his own property. Metaphorically, among parts of the soul, reason set over the irrational, there seems injustice toward oneself, as between ruler and ruled. Doing injustice is worse than suffering it. The one involves vice and blame. The other does not, though incidentally suffering may be the greater evil. People believe it easy to be just because hitting a neighbor is easy, but to do these while in a certain condition is neither easy nor up to them. Dispensing just things is a bigger job than knowing honey and wine for health. Yet to be unjust is to act while in a certain condition, as being a doctor is not cutting, but cutting in a certain way. Quote, whether it is possible to be unjust to oneself or not is evident from what has been said. Of the things that are just, some are things prescribed by law that go along with all virtue. For example, the law does not condone killing oneself, and what it does not condone it forbids. Quote, but metaphorically and through an image there is such a thing, not as justice by oneself toward oneself, but among certain things within oneself, and not all justice, but the sort practiced by a master of slaves or head of a household. For in arguments of that sort, the part of the soul having reason is set over against the irrational part. So it is to those who are looking at these parts that there seems to be injustice toward oneself, because among these parts it is possible to suffer something contrary to one's desires. Book 6, Virtues of Thinking. Book 6 turns from the virtues of character to those of the thinking soul. The earlier claim that virtue chooses the mean according to right reason was true but uninformative, as if one said health requires whatever medicine prescribes, without saying what medicine is. Having treated courage, temperance, and the other active conditions governing choice, Aristotle must now determine what right understanding is and what defines the mean in the rational part. The book anatomizes thinking as it bears on action and truth, a division of the soul, a catalog of the powers by which we disclose truth, and an impasse about whether wisdom and practical judgment are choice-worthy, resolved only when practical judgment is shown inseparable from virtue of character and cleverness from both. The rational soul, choice, and the sources of action. The virtues of the soul fall into those of character and those of thinking. The rational part itself must be divided further. One portion contemplates beings whose principles cannot be otherwise. Another contemplates what can be otherwise. Recognition follows likeness to its objects, so the parts differ in kind. Let one be the knowing part, and the other the calculating part. Deliberating and calculating are the same, and no one deliberates about necessities. Each part has its best active condition as its virtue, related to its work. Three things govern action and truth: sense perception, intellect, and desire. Sense perception is no source of action. Animals perceive, but do not share in human action. What affirming and denying are in thinking, pursuing and avoiding are in desiring. Virtue of character determines choice, and choice is deliberate desire. For choice to be of serious worth, rational understanding must be true and desire right. What the one affirms, the other pursues. In contemplative thinking, truth and falsity mark working well or badly. In thinking about action, working well is truth in agreement with right desire. Choice is the source of action, origin of motion, not the end, and arises from desire combined with rational understanding for the sake of something. There is no choice without intellect or without character. Doing well in action requires both. Thinking itself moves nothing, but thinking for the sake of something and pertaining to action does cause motion. A thing made aims at something. A thing done is an end, and desire aims at good action. Choice is intellect fused with desire, and such a source is a human being. Nothing past is chosen. One deliberates only about what is going to be and is possible. Truth is the work of both thinking parts, and the active conditions by which each most discloses truth are their joint virtues. Knowing part/calculating part, rational division by object, necessity versus variability. Deliberation belongs only to the latter. Choice, deliberate desire requiring true understanding and right desire affirming and pursuing the same end. Quote, choice is either intellect fused with desire or desire fused with thinking, and such a source is a human being. Knowledge, art, and practical judgment. Let the powers by which the soul discloses truth through affirming and denying be five: art, knowledge, practical judgment, wisdom, and intellect. Knowledge concerns what cannot be otherwise, everlasting, teachable, demonstrated from sources more evident than the conclusion. Among variable things, some are made and some done. Making and action differ, and so do their governing rational conditions. Art is true, rational understanding governing making. How something whose source is in the maker may come to be. It is not concerned with necessities or with things whose sources are in themselves. Inartfulness is the false counterpart. Practical judgment belongs to one who deliberates beautifully about living well as a whole, not health or strength in part alone. No one deliberates about necessities or about what one cannot do. Since knowledge demonstrates necessities and human affairs are variable, practical judgment is neither knowledge nor art. It is a truth-disclosing active condition involving reason governing action, concerned with good and bad for a human being. For acting well is itself the end of action. Knowledge concerns demonstrated universals. Neither knowledge, art, nor practical judgment grasps the undemonstrated sources. Wisdom, too, requires demonstration, so intellect remains directed at those sources. Wisdom in an art names excellence there, but we also call some wise holy. Wisdom is the most precise knowledge. Intellect plus knowledge of what is most highly honored. It would be absurd to rank politics or practical judgment as the most serious knowledge if humans were not the highest beings. Yet what is healthful differs by kind, while what is straight is the same. Wisdom is one, practical judgment differs. Anaxagoras and Thales are wise, but not practically judicious. They know wondrous, difficult things that do not inquire about human goods. Practical judgment concerns what can be deliberated. Its work is to deliberate well. Practical judgment needs universals and particulars, but more the latter, since action is of particulars. Experience often surpasses bare knowledge. Knowing light meats are healthful without knowing which are light does not produce health. The political art is the same active condition as practical judgment, though differently specified. Lawmaking in the overarching sense, politics in particulars governing decrees as ultimate actions. Young people become mathematicians, but not practically judicious, because particulars are known by experience, and mathematical objects come from abstraction, while natural sources require time. Practical judgment is directed at the ultimate particular the action to be performed, opposite to intellect, which grasps ultimate indivisible terms. There is no knowledge of the ultimate particular, only a perception beyond the separate senses. Wisdom, Sophia, intellect, plus knowledge of what is most honorable, theoretical, not ordered to human advantage. Intellect, nous grasps undemonstrated sources and ultimate particulars, beginning and end of disclosure. Quote, practical judgment is concerned with action, so that it needs to have both universals and particulars, or more so the latter. But even here there must be some overarching art, skilled deliberation, astuteness, and thoughtfulness. Skilled deliberation is not knowledge, guessing, or opinion, rightness in thinking things through before assertion. The unrestrained may deliberate rightly toward a bad end. Skilled deliberation governs attaining something good in end, means, and time. Rightness in accord with what is advantageous relative to the end, of which practical judgment is a true conception. Astuteness concerns the same matters as practical judgment, but only distinguishes when another speaks. Practical judgment imposes obligations about what one ought or ought not do. Thoughtfulness discriminates what is decent. Compassion governs that discrimination. These capacities converge on ultimate particulars, since action is always particular. Intellect grasps what is ultimate on both sides. Changeless first terms in demonstration and variable particulars in action, from which one discerns ends and derives universals. No one is wise by nature, but thoughtfulness and astuteness come with age. One ought to heed undemonstrated sayings of the experienced no less than demonstrations. Quote, intellect is directed at what is ultimate on both sides, since it is intellect and not reason that is directed at both the first terms and the ultimate particulars on the one side at the changeless first terms and demonstrations, and on the other side in thinking about action at the other supremise the variable ultimate particular. Cleverness, character, and the unity of virtue. One might raise an impasse. Wisdom contemplates nothing by which one becomes happy. Practical judgment seems useless if knowing the just does not make us able to do it. The resolution. Each intellectual virtue is choice-worthy as virtue of its part, yet they produce as health produces health, not as medicine produces health. Wisdom produces happiness as part of complete virtue at work. The human work is accomplished through practical judgment and character. Virtue makes the end right, practical judgment the means. Doing just things is not yet being just without choice for the sake of the actions. Cleverness enables achieving whatever object is set. If beautiful, it is praiseworthy. If base, it is shamelessness. Practical judgment requires cleverness, but is not identical with it. The soul's eye does not develop without virtue, for vice warps the sources governing action. Natural virtue resembles governing virtue, as cleverness resembles practical judgment, present from birth, harmful without intelligence. Socrates was right that there is no virtue without wise judgment, wrong to make all virtues forms of it. Virtue involves right reason. One cannot be good without practical judgment, nor have practical judgment without character. When practical judgment is present, all virtues are together. The method is dialectical. Set forth appearances, go through impasses, bring to light received opinions. Self-restraint and endurance are praised. Lack of self-restraint and softness blamed. The self-restrained stand by reasoning. The unrestrained stand aside, acting on passion while knowing actions are base. Yet appearances conflict. Some identify temperance with self-restraint. Others separate them. Some lump dissipation and unrestraint. Others distinguish them. Sometimes practical judgment excludes unrestraint. Sometimes clever people with practical judgment seem unrestrained. People are also called unrestrained for spiritedness, honor, or gain. These are the things that are said. Pathos versus hexis. Unrestraint is a passive experience, not a stable active condition like virtue or vice. It neither chooses nor rejects desires with the firmness proper to character. Quote, after these things, one ought to state, making another start, that there are three kinds of things to be avoided that have to do with one's character: vice, lack of self-restraint, and an animal-like state. Quote, one ought, as with other things, when one has set forth the appearances and has gone through the impasses a first time, to bring to light in that way, especially all the received opinions about these experiences, or if not that, then most and the most authoritative of these opinions. Appearances, impasses, and whether one acts against knowledge. One might raise an impasse. How can anyone who conceives things correctly behave without restraint? Socrates denied this altogether. When knowledge is present, nothing else should master it and drag it around like a slave, since no one acts contrary to what is best while believing that, but only from ignorance. The argument disputes plain appearances. If ignorance is the cause, what manner of ignorance? Others agree nothing is more powerful than knowledge, yet hold that opinion, not knowledge, is overpowered by pleasure. But mild opinion might deserve forgiveness, while vice does not, and it would be absurd if practical judgment itself were overcome, making the same person phronimos and unrestrained. Further impasses, self-restraint abiding by any opinion could be base. Unrestraint abandoning any opinion could be noble, as with Neoptolemus pained at lying in Sophocles' Philoctetes. A sophistical paradox would make senselessness plus unrestraint virtue. Someone acting from conviction seems more curable than one acting through unrestraint. When water chokes someone, what should he drink? One must clear away some impasses and leave others. Resolution is discovery. The dissipated person chooses excess, believing he always ought to pursue what is pleasant at hand. The unrestrained does not believe that but still pursues it. Opinion held without doubt may be as firm as knowledge. Knowing has two senses, having knowledge and using it. And acting contrary seems terrible only when one is attentively considering what one ought not to do. One may have universal premises, but not the particular governing this action, for actions are particulars. Passion resembles sleep, drunkenness, and madness. Unrestrained people recite demonstrations or empedocles while not yet knowing in the sense that governs action. From nature's standpoint, when universal judgment and particular perception collide with desire, desire takes the lead, not because opinion is opposed to right reason in itself, but incidentally. Animals lack universal conception and so are not unrestrained. When passion subsides, the unrestrained person comes to know again as the drunk or sleeper does, through the same natural explanation, not a peculiarity of moral psychology alone. Genuine knowledge remains intact only because, without the particular premise actively governing action, it was never sufficient to determine what to do here and now. Socrates is right in a sense. Not governing knowledge, but knowledge involving sense perception is dragged aside. The struggle is not knowledge against desire, but an unformed character in which thinking and desire have not yet been brought into accord. Premise failure. The universal judgment may be intact, while the particular premise that would govern this action is missing, inactive, or overwhelmed. Quote, but one might raise an impasse about how anyone who conceives things correctly behaves without restraint. So some people deny that this is possible for one who knows, since it would be a terrible thing if, when knowledge is present, something else were to master it and drag it around like a slave, as Socrates believed. Quote, for it is not when knowledge in the governing sense seems to be present that the experience of unrestraint occurs, nor is it this that is dragged around by passion, but a knowledge involving sense perception. Simple unrestraint, dissipation, and the analogies of honor and gain. Self-restrained and enduring people, and unrestrained and soft people, have to do with pleasures and pains. Necessary bodily pleasures, nourishment and sex, ground temperance and dissipation. Victory, honor, wealth admit excess. Those who violate their own rational understanding in these are unrestrained not simply, but with an addition, for money, gain, honor, spiritedness. Unrestraint simply is blamed as a kind of vice. Qualified cases are not. Among bodily enjoyments, one who pursues excess or avoids pain contrary to choice, and thinking lacks restraint simply. The dissipated choose, the unrestrained do not, yet both may act alike. One without strong desire who still pursues shamefully is more dissipated than one overpowered by desire. Money, honor, victory occupy a middle rank, naturally choice-worthy, blameworthy only in manner and excess. Zeal beyond measure. Niobe fighting the gods, Satyrus devoted to his father, is not vice or unrestraint simply, but likeness by analogy, as with a bad doctor who is not simply called bad. Some pleasures arise from nature, defect, habit, or corruption, animal-like savagery, disease, habitual gnawing, or unnatural sex. Nature or disease may produce mastery without simple unrestraint, as with women said to be passive in sex. An animal-like state is less bad than vice, though more frightening, since the rational part is not corrupted as in a human being. Yet a vicious person can do 10,000 times the harm of an animal. Only unrestraint corresponding to human dissipation counts simply. Other cases are metaphorical. Quote, so just as in those cases, since each of the instances is not badness, but is like it by analogy, so too it is clear that in these cases one ought to conceive of unrestraint and self-restraint as being whatever is concerned with the same things as temperance and dissipation. Spiritedness, desire, softness, and the modes of failure. Lack of restraint for spiritedness is less shameful than for desires. Spiritedness listens to reason, but mishears, like hurried servants or dogs barking before looking. Desire, told merely that something is pleasant, rushes to enjoyment without following reason at all. Spiritedness is open. Desire weaves snares. Aphrodite's soft words steal wits even from sturdy wisdom. Unrestraint in the simple sense connects with bodily desires and is vice in a certain sense. Among touch and taste, one may be unrestrained or self-restrained toward pleasures, soft or enduring toward pains. Dissipation pursues excess by choice without regret and is incurable. Unrestraint acts contrary to choice and can regret. Self-restraint overpowers desire. Endurance holds out against pain. Victory is nobler than mere resistance. Softness fails where most people resist. Childish playfulness is relaxation, not simple unrestraint. Unrestraint divides into impetuousness, passion before deliberation, and weakness, deliberation abandoned under passion. Those who foresee and awaken reasoning beforehand, like people guarding against tickling, resist. The excitable follow imagination without waiting for reason. Endurance versus self-restraint. Holding out against pain differs from overpowering desire. Not giving way differs from being victorious. Quote, but let us observe that a lack of restraint for spiritedness is less shameful than a lack of restraint for desires. For spiritedness seems to listen to reason to some extent, but to mishear it, just as servants in a hurry, who rush off before hearing everything that is said, get the instructions wrong. Quote, of unrestraint, one sort is impetuousness and another sort is weakness. For people of the latter sort have deliberated, but, on account of passion, do not stick to the things they decided by deliberating, while those of the former sort are led by passion because of not having deliberated. Dissipation, regret, stubbornness, and practical judgment. The dissipated stand by choice and do not regret. The unrestrained can regret. Vice is continuous like dropsy, unrestraint intermittent like epilepsy. Vice is unnoticed by its bearer. Unrestrained is known. The impulsive, unrestrained are better off than those who deliberate yet yield to weaker passions. Unrestraint is not vice, since one acts contrary to choice though alike in deed. Unrestrained people are not unjust schemers, yet do injustice. Virtue keeps the source, that for the sake of which one acts, safe. Vice destroys it. The unrestrained preserve the source, though passion masters action. The dissipated do not. Hence the unrestrained are better than the dissipated and not simply base. Stubborn people resemble the self-restrained but hold opinions from desire and pleasure, not truth, Neoptolemus yielded to a beautiful pleasure in truthfulness. The self-restrained is a mean between one who enjoys bodily pleasures too little and the unrestrained. Practical judgment and unrestraint cannot coexist. Phronesis belongs to serious character and enables action, which the unrestrained cannot perform. Cleverness without right choice may deceive us. The unrestrained act willingly, knowing in a manner, with a decent person's choice, halfway to vice. Like a city with good laws, it does not use. Excitable unrestraint cures more easily than weak. Habit easier than nature, though habit itself seems like nature. Quote, the dissipated person, as was said, does not have regrets, since he stands by his choice, but every unrestrained person is capable of regret. Quote, nor is it possible for the same person to be possessed of practical judgment and at the same time be unrestrained. For the person with practical judgment was demonstrated to be at the same time someone of serious stature in character. The inquiry into pleasure and the arguments against it. The political philosopher must examine pleasure and pain, master craftsman of the end, by which we call things good or bad simply. Virtue and vice concern pleasures and pains. Happiness involves pleasure, hence blessedness from blissful enjoyment. Some deny any pleasure is good. Some admit a few. A third denies pleasure is best, even if all are good. Critics say pleasure is coming into being, not end, that temperance avoids it. Practical judgment pursues absence of pain. Sex blocks thought. No art makes pleasure. Children and animals pursue it. Some pleasures are shameful or harmful. These do not follow. Good has two senses, simply and for someone, and pleasures differ accordingly. Some seeming pleasures heal the sick and are not pleasures properly. Pleasure is being at work of an active condition in accord with nature, unimpeded, not mere restoration. People do not enjoy the same thing while nature is being restored and when settled into its condition. Sour and bitter things please only in recovery, not simply. Contemplation brings pleasure without pain or desire. Pleasure from each activity aids that activity. Only alien pleasures impede judgment. Hence no art produces pleasure as it produces capacity, though cookery and perfumery seem to. Temperance avoids bodily excess. Not all pleasure. Practical judgment pursues freedom from painful bodily want, not the absence of noble pleasure. Pain is avoidable bad. Its opposite in that respect is good. So pleasure is good. Speusippus' comparison of pleasure to the greater, opposite to lesser, and equal alike, does not refute this. If happiness is unimpeded being at work, the most unimpeded state is most choice-worthy, pleasure. The happy life is pleasantly lived. Without good pleasure, even the serious life would lack reason to avoid pain. All pursue pleasure, though not the same ones. Bodily pleasures dominate the name, because they are most common. Yet perhaps all pursue the same pleasure in truth, since every nature holds something divine. Being at work versus coming into being. Pleasure is unimpeded being at work of a complete active condition, not mere process into a natural state. Quote, it belongs to one who engages in philosophic inquiry about politics to examine what concerns pleasure and pain, for he is the master craftsman of the end to which we look when we speak of each thing as bad or good simply. Quote, and therefore it is not right to claim that pleasure is a perceptible process of coming into being. Rather, one ought to say that it is a being at work of an active condition in accord with nature, and instead of perceptible, unimpeded. Bodily pleasure and why it seems to prevail. Bodily pleasures with which dissipation is concerned seem less worthy than beautiful pleasures, yet pains opposite them are bad, good as necessary or up to a measure. Excess of bodily good makes one base. Necessary pleasures, food, wine, sex, everyone enjoys somehow. Pain, unlike pleasure, is avoided entirely, not only in excess. One should explain why the false seems true. Bodily pleasures drive out pain. Excess pain makes people pursue violent curative pleasure as though medicine. Such pleasures seem base or restorative. Having is better than coming into having. Those incapable of other enjoyments pursue bodily pleasure for its violence, even inducing thirst. Neutral states feel painful. Youth and excitable temperaments live in continual need of relief. Pleasures without pain admit no excess. They arise from what is pleasant by nature. Our composite nature prevents one simple permanent pleasure. When parts conflict, action feels neutral. A god enjoys one simple pleasure in rest more than motion. Yet change is sweet to us from badness. Unstable natures need change. Self-restraint, unrestraint, pleasure, and pain have been discussed. Friendship remains. Quote, however, one ought to state not only what is true, but also the reason behind what is false, since this contributes toward confidence in what one is saying. For when one gives a reasonable explanation of why what is not true appears to be true, it makes people be more confident of what is true. Quote, hence, a god always enjoys a pleasure that is one and simple, for there is a being at work, not only of motion, but also of motionlessness, and there is a greater pleasure in rest than in motion. But change of everything is sweet, according to the poet, on account of some badness. Book 8, Friendship and Community. After the examination of unrestraint, Aristotle turns to friendship, not as a minor social grace, but as a state of character that either is a certain kind of virtue or goes with virtue, and that proves most necessary for life. No one would choose to live without friends, even if he possessed all other goods. The rich, rulers, and powerful seem to need friends most. What use is abundance if one cannot do favors toward friends in the most praiseworthy way? How could great possessions be guarded without friends, since the greater the wealth, the shakier its foundation? In poverty and misfortune, friends appear the only refuge. They help the young avoid error, the old receive care, and those at their peak perform beautiful actions together, when two go together, since companions think and act more capably. Friendship seems present by nature between parent and child, among human beings and animals. Travelers find every human being akin and friendly. Friendship holds cities together, and lawmakers take it more seriously than justice. Like-mindedness resembles friendship, and legislators aim at it while banishing faction. When people are friends, there is no need of justice, but when there is still need of friendship. And among just things, what inclines toward friendship seems most just of all. Friendship is not only necessary, but beautiful. We praise those who love their friends, and an abundance of friends counts among beautiful things. Yet dispute runs deep. Likeness versus unlikeness as the ground of friendship, and Aristotle sets natural explanations aside to examine character. Whether all can be friends, whether the vicious can, and whether friendship is one species or many. What is lovable and what counts as friendship? Perhaps the inquiry becomes clear once what is lovable is discerned. Not everything is loved, but only what is lovable, the good, the pleasant, or the useful. The useful is that by which something good or pleasant comes about. So the good and pleasant are loved as ends. One might raise an impasse. Do people love the good, or what is good for themselves? Each loves what appears good for himself, while the good simply is lovable simply. Three things account for loving, but loving inanimate things is not friendship. No loving in return, no wishing the good of the thing for its own sake. It would be ridiculous to wish good things for wine. People say one ought to wish good for a friend for his own sake. Goodwill names wishing good when the same does not come from the other. Reciprocal goodwill is called friendship, or must one add mutual awareness? Many are good-willed toward those unseen, but believe decent or useful without knowing one another. They are good-willed, but how friends when unaware how they stand? Friendship requires goodwill, wishing good for one another while not unaware on account of one of the reasons mentioned. Goodwill, wishing another's good for his sake. Reciprocal goodwill with mutual awareness is friendship's threshold, not yet the complete active condition. Quote, but people say that one ought to wish for good things for a friend for his own sake. However, they call people good-willed who wish for good things in that way, when the same thing does not come from the other person, since they speak of goodwill in people who reciprocate it as being friendship. Or must one add, when they are not unaware of it. 3 species of friendship and the complete kind. These reasons differ in species, and so do loving and friendship. There are 3 species: reciprocal loving, not unaware, with each wishing good in the same sense in which each loves. Those who love for usefulness or pleasure love not the person for himself, but as provider of benefit or charm. Incidental friendships, easily dissolved when people change. Useful friendship appears among the old and the advantage-seeking. Young friendship rests on pleasure and turns over rapidly, though both kinds wish to live together when benefit or enjoyment requires it. The complete friendship is between good people alike in virtue. They wish good for one another as good in the same way and are good in themselves. Those who wish good for friends for their own sake are friends most of all. Their friendship lasts as long as they are good, and virtue is enduring. Each is good simply and good for his friend. Good people are beneficial and similarly pleasant to one another. Such friendship is lasting because everything that ought to belong to friends is joined in it, yet likely rare. Time and intimate acquaintance are required. People cannot know one another until they use up the proverbial amount of salt together. They cannot be friends until each shows himself lovable and is trusted. Those who quickly gesture friendship want to be friends, but are not unless lovable and aware of it. Pleasant and useful friendships resemble complete friendship insofar as the good are pleasant and useful. We must call useful and pleasant associates friends, but say friendship in the primary sense is between the good as good, while other kinds are friendships by likeness. Quote, but the complete sort of friendship is that between people who are good and are alike in virtue, since they wish for good things for one another in the same way insofar as they are good, and they are good in themselves. And those who wish for good things for their friends for their own sake are friends most of all, since they are that way for themselves and not incidentally. So the friendship of these people lasts as long as they are good, and virtue is enduring. Quote, also, there is an additional need of time and intimate acquaintance, for according to the common saying, it is not possible for people to know one another until they use up the proverbial amount of salt together. And so it is not possible for them to accept one another before that, or to be friends until each shows himself to each as lovable and is trusted. Friendship as active condition, equality, and superiority. As with virtues, friendship holds either as active condition or as being at work. Those who live together take pleasure and provide good things. Others apart are not at work, but remain in condition to be at work as friends. Places do not dissolve friendship, but only its being at work. Long absence causes forgetfulness. Lack of communication breaks up many friendships. Those who approve but do not live together seem good-willed rather than friends, since nothing is so characteristic of friends as living together. Affection resembles feeling. Friendship resembles active condition. Loving in return involves choice, and choice comes from active condition. By loving the friend, one loves what is good for oneself. Each gives back equally in wishing and pleasure. Friendship is equal relationship, belonging most to the friendship of the good. Complete friendship with many is not possible, as loving many at once. Yet many may be pleased for usefulness and pleasure. The blessed need pleasant friends to live with, though they ought to seek those also good and good for themselves. A different form goes with superiority, father and son, husband and wife, ruler and ruled, and these differ in virtue, work, and grounds of love. The same thing should not come to each, but when children and parents give what is owed, friendship is lasting. An unequal friendship's affection ought to be proportional. The better or greater benefactor ought to be loved more. What is equal in justice differs from equality in friendship. Justice prioritizes desert, friendship primarily amount. Great divergence in friendship, manifest with gods and kings. An impasse. Friends perhaps do not wish that friends become gods, for then friendship would cease. One wishes the greatest goods for someone still human. Most want to be loved more than to love. hence fondness for flatterers. Yet being loved is enjoyed for itself, and friendship choice-worthy for itself. Friendship is more in loving than being loved. Mothers delight in loving even without return. Unequal friends may be equalized when loving accords with worth. Being at work of friendship. Living together. Absence suspends the work, not the condition, until forgetfulness sets in. Proportional affection. In unequal friendships, the superior is loved more. Desert and amount trade places between justice and friendship. Quote, affection seems like a feeling, but friendship seems like an active condition, for affection is no less present for inanimate things. But loving in return involves choice, and choice comes from an active condition. Quote, and if it was beautifully said that a friend wishes for good things for a friend for that friend's own sake, that friend would need to remain whatever he is. Thus one would wish for the greatest goods for someone who is still a human being. Friendship, justice, and political community. Friendship and justice concern the same things. In every community something just appears, and also friendship, shipmates, fellow soldiers, and others addressed as friends. To the extent they share in common, to that extent friendship and justice exist. The proverb that the things of friends are common is right, since friendship consists in community. Just things vary, not the same for parents and children as brothers, nor comrades as fellow citizens, and injustice grows worse with fuller friendship. All communities are parts of the political community, which gathers for advantage through all of life. Other communities aim at partial advantage or pleasure, but fall under the political whole. Friendships of such kinds go along with communities of such kinds. 3 constitutions, kingship, aristocracy, timocracy, have deviations in tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. Households mirror them, father as king, husband and wife as aristocracy, brothers as timocracy. In each, friendship appears to the extent of justice. In tyranny, where ruler and ruled share nothing, there is neither friendship nor justice, as with master and slave is slave. Though insofar as a slave is human, something just and friendly remains. Quote, now it seems, as was said at the beginning, that friendship and justice concern the same things and are present in the same things. For in every sort of community, there seems to be something just and also friendship. And the proverb, the things of friends are common, is right, since friendship consists in community. Quote, for in those situations in which there is nothing shared by the ruler and the ruled, there is no friendship, since there is no justice either, as in a craftsman in relation to a tool, or in a soul in relation to a body, or in a master in relation to a slave. Family friendships and the troubles of useful association. Relative friendship derives from the paternal. Parents love children as part of themselves. Children love parents as from whom they come. Brothers love as from the same parents, same blood or root. Parents love longer from birth. Mothers love more. Husband and wife friendship is by nature. The household is prior to the city, and humans dwell together for life's needs, dividing work and placing each contribution into the common supply. Hence use and pleasure, and friendship for virtue if decent. Children are a bond, since what is shared holds couples together. In each kind of friendship some are equal, some superior. Equals ought to love equally, unequals proportionally. Complaints arise most in useful friendship, where each wants more than due. As justice has unwritten and legal sides, useful friendship has character-based and legalistic forms. Trouble when dissolution rests on different grounds than association. In superior friendships, each believes he deserves more. The better claims more honor, the needy claims more gain. Each side is partly right, more honor to the superior, more gain to the needy. What accords with worth equalizes friendship. One ought give honor for benefit received, what one can. Friendship seeks what is possible, not always what is deserved, as with gods and parents. A son may not renounce a father, though a father may release a son, since nothing repays what parents have done. Yet hardly anyone cuts off a son not extreme in vice. Quote, parents, then, love children as themselves, for things that come from themselves by being separated are a sort of other selves, while children love parents as being by nature from them, and brothers love one another by being by nature from the same parents, since their sameness with them produces a sameness with one another, for which reason people speak of the same blood or root and such. Quote, so this is the way one ought to associate with unequals. The one who is given the benefit of money or virtue ought to give honor in return, giving back what he is capable of giving. For friendship seeks after what is possible, not what is deserved, since there is not even any such thing in all cases, as in the honors given to the gods and to parents. Book 9. Friendship Continued. Book 9 turns from the varieties of friendship to what unifies it from within. Proportional return in mixed cases, impasses of obligation, break up when people change, the extension of self-relation to another, and whether happiness itself requires friends and living together. Hybrid friendships, proportional return, and complaints. In all hybrid friendships, those in which the parties do not love on the same terms, what is proportional equalizes and preserves the friendship, as in the political community where return is made to a craftsman according to worth. But in sexual relationships, complaint often follows. A lover complains his surpassing love is not requited, though he has nothing lovable about him. The beloved complains the lover who promised everything now fulfills none of it. Such things result when one loves for pleasure and the other for usefulness, and these are not both present. When friendship comes from these reasons, breakup happens whenever those things for the sake of which they loved do not take place, since they were fond not of each other, but of attributes that were not lasting. Friendship from character lasts, since it is for itself. One might raise as an impasse what happens when what comes is different from what was sought. Whenever the thing one aims at is not what one gets, it is like getting nothing. Like the harpist promised more pay the better he would sing, but at dawn told to take pleasure in return for pleasure. If one wants enjoyment and the other gain, and only the former gets it, the relationship is not well provided. To which party does it belong to decide what is deserved? Protagoras, having taught, insisted the learner evaluate how much knowing it seemed worth, and took that much. But those who take money in advance and do none of what they promised naturally come upon complaints. No doubt sophists are forced to this. Among those who give freely for their own sake, there are no complaints. Friendship in accord with virtue is of this sort. When giving is for something, perhaps what is given in return ought be what seems deserved to both. If not, it seems necessary, and just for the one first to receive to decide, since many things are not valued alike by those who have them and those who want them. Perhaps one ought set value not at how much it seems worth when he has it, but at how much he estimated before having it. Obligations to parents, benefactors, and friends. There is an impasse whether one ought obey one's father in all things, or a doctor when sick, whether to assist a friend rather than someone of serious worth, or pay back a benefactor, or give to a comrade when both are not possible. One ought not give all things to the same person. For the most part, one ought return favors rather than gratify comrades. Yet if ransomed from pirates, ought he ransom his ransomer, or pay him back, or ransom one's father? It would seem one ought ransom one's father, even in preference to oneself, while one ought in general pay back a debt. If beauty or necessity exerts a stronger pull, one ought incline toward these. Discourse concerning feelings and actions has the definiteness that belongs to the things it is about. One ought not give the same return to all, nor all things to one's father. Parents, brothers, comrades, and benefactors each receive what is appropriate, sustenance and suited honor to parents, frank speech and sharing to comrades, apportionment by closeness, virtue, and usefulness to fellow citizens. Dissolving friendships when people change. There is an impasse about dissolving friendships with people who do not remain the same. Nothing is strange about breaking with friends for use or pleasure when those attributes depart, but complaint is just if one pretended to love for character while loving for use or pleasure. Most differences between friends come when they are not friends in the same way they think they are. Mistaken assumption warrants self-blame. Deception warrants complaint, even more than counterfeiting currency, to the degree the wrong concerns something more valuable. If one accepted someone as good, and he becomes corrupt, should one still love him? What is bad is not lovable. One ought not be fond of vice. Break off with the incurable. Help those who can be straightened out, more in character than wealth. If one stays the same, while the other becomes far more decent, childhood friends illustrate the impasse. How could they share satisfaction, joy, and pain when incapable of living together? One ought be mindful of past intimacy and allot something to former friends when the breakup has not come from excessive vice. Quote, but someone might complain if, while loving him for use or pleasure, one pretended that it was for his character. For as we said in the beginning, most differences between friends come about when they are not friends in the same way they think they are. Friendship from self-relation, goodwill, and like-mindedness. The things involved in friendship seem to come from things related to oneself. A friend wishes and does good for the other's sake, wants the friend to live for his own sake, as mothers toward children, or shares time, preferences, pain, and enjoyment. Each belongs to a decent person toward himself. Virtue and the person of serious worth are the measure. He agrees with himself, wants good for himself, and does it for his own sake, wants himself preserved especially in that by which he judges. No one chooses to have all things by becoming someone else. He spends time with himself pleasantly, without regrets, because he can relate to a friend as to himself. The friend is another self. Friendship is any of these things. A base person is not friendly toward himself. Soul in civil war, fleeing himself for company. One ought to avoid vice and try to be decent. Goodwill is not friendship. It arises without acquaintance or desire, a beginning like the pleasure of seeing before love, out-of-work friendship that may become complete through time and association on account of virtue or fitness. Like-mindedness is not sameness of opinion about the heavens. Cities are like-minded when they choose and act on common beliefs about great advantageous things. Decent people aim at the just and common. People of low character watch neighbors to hinder them. Goodwill, wish for another's good without intimate acquaintance or exertion. Beginning of friendship, not yet friendship. Like-mindedness, agreement about advantageous things to be done in common, not theoretical sameness of opinion. Quote, so it is because each of these things is present in a decent person in relation to himself, and because he can be related to a friend as he is to himself, since the friend is another self, that friendship seems to be any of these things, and that friends seem to be those to whom they belong. Why benefactors love more, and self-love of the decent person. Benefactors love those they benefit more than recipients love them. Debtors wish creditors away, yet benefactors love those for whom they did good, even if useless later. Every artisan loves his work more than it would love him. The benefited is their work, loved because the maker loves to be. We are by being at work. For the benefactor the act is beautiful, for the receiver only advantageous. Loving is making. Mothers love children more, because birth is labor. One might raise whether one ought love oneself most or another. Base self-lovers hoard money, honors, and pleasures. Decent people seem to sacrifice interest for friends. Yet the best friend is oneself by the definition of friendship, hence the impasse. Reproached self-lovers gratify the irrational, but one eager to do the just and save beautiful actions for himself is the true self-lover, obeying what is most authoritative. He dies for friends and country when needed, choosing one great beautiful action over many small ones, keeping the greater share of the beautiful when a friend gains money and he gains the noble deed. Quote, therefore, a good person ought to be a lover of self, since he will both profit himself and benefit the others by performing beautiful actions, and a corrupt person ought not, since he will harm himself and those around him by following base passions. Whether the happy person needs friends and living together. Does a happy person need friends? The blessed seem self-sufficient. Why need another self? Yet not granting friends to the happy seems absurd. Friends appear the greatest external goods, and doing good for others belongs to virtue, more beautifully for friends than strangers. A human being is for the city and to live with others, Solitude ill-suits happiness. Those who deny the need think of friends for use or pleasure. A blessed person lacks neither. But happiness is being at work, not possession. We contemplate others' actions better than our own, and a serious friend's actions are pleasant to the good. Life is hard alone. Being at work is easier among others, and virtue is trained by good company. Awareness that we perceive or think is awareness that we are pleasant because life is good. Why not share a friend's awareness through living together and sharing conversation and thinking, not feeding like cattle? Friends of serious worth are necessary for happiness, not excessively many. Sharing a life is impossible with a crowd. In misfortune, friends are more necessary. In good fortune, more beautiful. Their presence lightens cares, though spreading grief to friends is painful. For friends, as for lovers, living together is most choice-worthy, the being at work of awareness that one is. Base friendships corrupt through shared vice. Decent friendships grow, straightening rough edges. Quote, therefore one also ought to share in a friend's awareness that he is, and this would come about through living together and sharing conversation and thinking. For this would seem to be what living together means in the case of human beings, not feeding in the same place like fatted cattle. Book X, Pleasure and Happiness. Book X returns to pleasure before happiness can be judged with full confidence. Pleasure and pain are especially indwelling in our kind. They steer the young, and feelings of enjoyment and hatred extend through life with a weight that tends toward virtue and a happy life. Yet the subject involves a great dispute. Some say pleasure is the good. Others, at the opposite extreme, say it is completely base, some being convinced, others believing it better to make pleasure appear base even if it is not, since most people are enslaved to their pleasures and need to be led to the opposite side to reach the mean. One might raise as an impasse whether this counsel is sound. Words about feelings and actions are less believable than deeds. When discordant with what is perceived, those who condemn pleasure yet pursue it seem to affirm that all of it is good, since most people do not make distinctions. True statements seem most useful not only for knowing but for life, since they are in tune with one's deeds. The dispute about pleasure. The philosophic debate singles out two extremes whose merits are entwined with the lives of their advocates. Eudoxus held that pleasure is the good because all beings aim at it, and what all aim at is the good. His arguments convinced on account of his temper character more than on their own account. He argued also from pain's universal avoidance and from pleasure's being chosen for itself, and that pleasure added to any good makes it more choice-worthy. Yet by itself the good is augmented. That latter argument shows pleasure is among good things, but no more than any other, since each is more choice-worthy along with another good. Plato rebuts that a pleasant life is more choice-worthy with intelligence. If the mixture is better, pleasure is not the good, for the good does not become more choice-worthy when something is added. Those who deny that what all aim at is good say nothing, since we declare to be so what seems so to all. Further objections fail. If pleasure's indefiniteness were judged from being pleased, the same would apply to justice and the virtues, of which people speak more and less. Pleasure is not emotion. One can become pleased quickly, but not be pleased quickly as one can walk or grow. Nor is it always restoration. Mathematical pleasures are free of pain, and many sensory, memorial, and hopeful pleasures involve no prior lack. The restorative account from hunger and satiety does not generalize. Shameful pleasures are not pleasant except to the corrupt or differ in kind. A just pleasure requires a just person, as a musical pleasure requires a musical person. The friend differs from the flatterer because one associates for the good and the other for pleasure. No one would choose lifelong childish thinking for childish pleasures, nor shameful enjoyment without pain. We would exert ourselves for seeing, knowing, and virtue even without pleasure following. Though when pleasures do follow, they do not alter the choice-worthiness of those activities themselves. Eudoxus's argument. Universal aiming at pleasure versus Plato's proof that the good admits no addition. Motion versus being at work. Pleasure is whole in the now, not a temporally directed change. Quote, if someone who condemns pleasure is seen sometimes going after it, he seems to incline toward it because all of it is good, since making distinctions is not something most people do. So true statements seem to be the most useful ones, not only for knowing but also for life. For since they are in tune with one's deeds, they are believed, and they encourage those who understand them to live by them. Quote, it seems to be clear, then, that pleasure is not the good, and that not every pleasure is choice-worthy, and that there are some pleasures that are choice-worthy in themselves, differing in kind or in the things they come from. Pleasure as completion of being at work. What pleasure is becomes evident from its source. Seeing is complete over any time, lacking nothing whose coming would complete its form. Pleasure is like this, a whole with no time after which its form becomes complete. Hence, it is not a motion directed at an end, whose parts are incomplete and differ in form. One can be in motion only through time, but one can feel pleasure in the now. Each sense completely at work upon the best of what it perceives is most complete and most pleasant. So too thinking and contemplation, whose most complete activity is most pleasant when a power in good condition is directed toward what is of most serious worth. Pleasure brings the activity to completion, not as an active condition within it, but as something coming over it, like bloom on those at the peak of their powers, not as the perceptible or the sense completes it from within. Why is no one pleased continuously? Nothing human stays at work without limit. Novelty excites attention at first, then activity slackens and pleasure dims. All beings reach out for pleasure because they desire to live. Life is being at work, and pleasure completes activities and thereby living. Pleasures differ in kind because different activities are completed by different means. The appropriate pleasure grows the activity, while alien pleasures impede it. The flautist's pleasure ruins argument. The special pleasure in a worthy activity is decent, in a base one, corrupt. What appears pleasant to a person of serious moral stature is pleasant. Among decent pleasures, those of the fulfilled human being follow the governing activities that bring life to completion. Completion, teleosis pleasure crowns complete being at work when agent and object are at their best, not a mere appendage or internal part. Appropriate pleasure, each activity has its own. Alien pleasures wreck it as its own pains do. Quote, the pleasure brings the activity to completion not as an active condition present within it all along, but as something that comes over it, like the bloom of well-being in people who are at the peak of their powers. Quote, without being at work, no pleasure comes about, and pleasure brings every way of being at work to completion. Happiness revisited and the standoff with play. With virtues, friendships, and pleasures discussed, happiness remains, the end set at the outset. It is not an active condition, for then it could belong to one asleep or in misfortune. Happiness must be a being at work chosen for its own sake and self-sufficient. Actions in accord with virtue are such as are playful pleasures. Yet play harms more than it benefits, and tyrants' favorites are no measure of the good life. Children and base people take their own satisfactions for the best. To the person of serious worth, what is worthwhile and pleasant is what is so truly, and the activity from virtue is most choice-worthy. Happiness does not consist in play. It would be absurd to toil through life for play's sake. Everything is chosen for something else except happiness. To labor for play is childish. To play in order to be serious, as Anaxagoras says, is right. Relaxation exists for being at work's sake, not as end. The happy life accords with virtue and seriousness. A slave may enjoy bodily pleasures equally, but no one grants him happiness if he lacks a share in life itself. Quote, we choose everything, so to speak, for the sake of something else, except happiness, since this is the end. But to be earnest and to labor for the sake of play seems foolish and too childish. But to play in order that one might be serious, as Anaxagoras says, seems to be right, since play seems like relaxation, and since people are incapable of laboring continuously, they need relaxation. Contemplative life and the political life. If happiness is being at work in accord with virtue, It should accord with the most powerful virtue of the best part, the intellect, or whatever rules and contemplates the beautiful and divine. Its proper being at work is contemplative and would be complete happiness. This activity is most powerful and most continuous. Wisdom's pleasures are pure and stable, and self-sufficiency belongs to it most of all. The wise person contemplates even alone. Contemplation alone is loved for itself. Action always aims beyond itself. We pursue unleisured things for leisure and war for peace. Political and martial actions, though preeminent in beauty and magnitude, are unleisured and chosen for ends beyond themselves. Intellect's being at work is serious, contemplative, self-sufficient, and crowned by its own pleasure. That is complete human happiness across a full life, yet greater than mere humanity, insofar as something divine is in us. Each person would seem to be this governing part, if it is the better part, and strange to choose another's life over one's own. One should not think merely human or mortal thoughts, but, as far as possible, live by the most powerful thing in oneself. The life of the other virtues is happy, secondarily. Its activities are human, bound to feeling, the body, and practical judgment intertwined with character. Contemplative happiness is separate and needs fewer external props for its activity itself, though the contemplator still chooses virtuous action in company with others. The gods, deprived of petty actions, must be at work in contemplation. Happiness extends as far as contemplation does. Humans need moderate external goods. Solon and Anaxagoras judged happiness by measured means and beautiful deeds, not riches alone. Private persons may act as beautifully as the powerful. Primary versus secondary happiness. Contemplation is complete and godlike. Ethical and political virtue yields a human happiness that supports it. Leisure, only contemplation is wholly for its own sake among human fulfillments. Quote, if, among actions in accord with the virtues, those that pertain to politics and war are preeminent in beauty and magnitude, but they are unleisured and aim at some end and are not chosen for their own sake, while the being at work of the intellect seems to excel in seriousness, and to be contemplative and aim at no end beyond itself, and to have its own pleasure, which increases its activity, so that what is as self-sufficient, leisured, and unwearied as possible for a human being, and all the other things that are attributed to a blessed person, show themselves as the things that result from this way of being at work. Then this would be the complete happiness of a human being if it takes in a complete span of life, for none of the things that belong to happiness is incomplete. Quote, but one should not follow those who advise us to think human thoughts, since we are human, and mortal thoughts, since we are mortal, but as far as possible one ought to be immortal and to do all things with a view toward living in accord with the most powerful thing in oneself. Law, education, and the limits of discourse. Has the inquiry reached its end? In matters of action, the end is not knowing but doing. Knowing virtue is insufficient without having and using it. Discourses alone would command large fees if they made people decent, but they chiefly inspire open-natured youth, not the many who live by feeling, pursue comfortable pleasures, and lack taste for the truly beautiful. Words rarely undo characters long formed. Nature, habit, and teaching each play a part, yet the listener's soul must be prepared by habits loving the beautiful and scorning the shameful, like ground for seed. Feeling yields to force more than to argument. Right training from youth requires laws, since temperance and endurance are not pleasant to most, especially the young. Habitual rearing must continue in adulthood under laws governing the whole life, since compulsion persuades where argument fails. Public concern with power to educate is best. Failing that, each should care for children and friends, aided by knowledge of lawmaking, since a father's words lack compulsion unless he is a king, while law is speech with compulsory force that orders what is decent without being hated for opposing impulse. Tailored education excels common training, as medicine treats individuals, yet law-giving knowledge remains necessary for those who would make others good. Experience matters in politics. Sophists profess what they do not practice and cannot even say what the political art is. Laws are works of the political art. Constitution collections help only the capable judge, as medical textbooks help the experienced rather than the ignorant. The ethics closes by turning toward the politics, insisting that truth in action is discerned from deeds in life. The wise person, dear to the gods and happiest, must be tested there, not in words alone. Quote, "Now if discourses by themselves were sufficient for making people decent, then justly they would take many large fees, as Theognis says, and one would need to provide them. But as things are, discourses appear to have the power to encourage and stimulate open-natured young people, and would make a well-born character that loves what is truly beautiful be inspired with virtue. But they are unable to encourage most people toward what is beautiful and good." Quote, "Hence it is necessary to arrange for rearing and exercises by laws, since they will not be painful when they have become habitual. And no doubt it is not enough for people to hit upon the right rearing and discipline when they are young, but also afterward, when they have reached adulthood, they must practice these things and habituate themselves, and we would need laws about these things as well, and so, generally, about the whole of life." Conclusion. The Nicomachean ethics argues that the human good is happiness as being at work of soul in accordance with the best virtue, over a complete life, with friends and other external goods as necessary equipment, rather than as the substance of happiness itself. Books 1 to 2 set the architectonic, ends ordered under politics, method adequate to the subject, popular lives tested, the ergon argument, habit without mindless routine, and the mean as qualitative stance for the sake of the beautiful. Books 3 v particularize responsibility and the virtues of character through justice as another's good. Book 6 shows that practical judgment and character virtue stand or fall together against cleverness without the right end. Book 7 places unrestraint between vice and virtue and begins the inquiry into pleasure. Books 8 to 9 elevate friendship as necessary, beautiful, and political. Book X completes pleasure as bloom on being at work, ranks contemplative happiness first and political second, and turns to law and education so that discourse can take root in habit. Limits are those Aristotle states. Clarity only as the subject allows. The young are unfit hearers if they live by passion. Words alone rarely reform the many. Saxe's lexicon, being at work, active condition, the beautiful, keeps the ethics from collapsing into function talk, state talk, or noble talk. The work does not replace the politics. It prepares for it. Readers seeking a rules code or a radio dial mean will be frustrated. Readers willing to follow appearances through impasses to what remains of received opinion will find the pattern of a practical science that aims at becoming good, not merely knowing what goodness is. Key persons discussed. Aristotle, author, Dialectical Inquiry into the Human Good across 10 books. Joe Sachs, translator, restores being at work, active condition, and the beautiful against Latinate and smooth English defaults. Plato, praise for arguing toward first principles, the separate form of the good held off as not first for ethics. Socrates claimed that no one acts against knowledge, corrected and refined in the Acrasia discussion. Book 7. Eudoxus argues pleasure is the good. Character lends weight to his case. Book X. Solon, call no one happy while he lives. Reframed around being at work and fortune. Book I. Homer/tragic poets. Exempla for courage, friendship, and beautiful action. Antigone, Philoctetes via Saxe's intro. Key works discussed. Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle primary text. 10 books on happiness, virtue, justice, thinking, unrestraint, friendship, pleasure. Politics, Aristotle destination of Book X's turn to law-giving and constitutions. Metaphysics/physics/on the soul. Theoretical home of energia that Sax reconnects to the ethics. Homer, Theognis, Euripides. Poetic authorities and aporii within the dialectical texture. Index of core concepts. Happiness, Eudaimonia, the human good, as a being at work of soul in accordance with the best and most complete virtue, over a complete life, not without friends and other external goods as equipment, rather than as the substance of happiness itself. It is not a mood, a stored possession, or mere posthumous reputation. Solon's saying is reframed, not simply endorsed. Book X ranks contemplative being at work as primary happiness and the political life of complete virtue of character as secondary. Being at work, Energius Sax's rendering of Aristotle's central word, the living exercise that unlocks happiness in Book I and that pleasure completes as a bloom in Book X. It rules out reducing the human organ to a subordinate function, as of stomach, and rules out the frictionless English activity that asks nothing of the reader and severs the ethics from the theoretical books where the same word becomes actuality. Active condition, Hex's character as a held stance, a way we take hold of feelings and dispositions that begin as mere passivities, not a passive state, and not English habit as mindless routine. Virtues and vices of character are such conditions. Ethics concerns them because we decisively form the selves we become. Habituation from childhood makes an enormous difference without being the whole cause or final form of a good life. Mean relative to us. Virtue of character stands between excess and deficiency as practical judgment determines for the person and the circumstances, an extreme in excellence, a mean only in relation to the vices. It rules out radiodial arithmetic, gentleman's C, mediocrity, and prescribing one right quantity of action for everybody. Hitting the mean requires aiming away from the worst extreme, straightening warped boards, and guarding against pleasure seductions. The beautiful, to in the end for the sake of which the virtues choose, common to courage, magnificence, and the rest, which Sax restores against noble as impractical high-mindedness and fine as fragile taste. Right desire and right reason first perceive the end as beautiful. Sense perception judges what is morally right. A virtuous act is like a well-made work that would take nothing added or subtracted, only more precise than art. Choice, proeresis, deliberation, and wishing. The architecture of willing action in Book 3. Wishing looks to ends, deliberation inquires into means that are up to us, and choice is deliberative desire. Force and ignorance of particulars can excuse. Ignorance of the universal and the character we have formed do not. This structure underwrites praise, blame, and the claim that we are co-causes of the sort of people we become. Practical judgment, phronesis excellence of the calculating part that discloses truth about human goods that can be otherwise, distinct from art, making, science, what cannot be otherwise, and wisdom, the most honorable things. It requires and completes virtue of character. Cleverness, denotes, can hit means without the right end. Without practical judgment, natural virtue remains incomplete. Without character virtue, judgment loses its target. Justice and decency. Epieikeia justice as complete virtue in relation to another, someone else's good, and as particular fairness in distribution by merit and corrective equalization of wrongful gains and losses. Reciprocity through need and currency holds exchange together. Political justice is partly natural, partly legal. Decency corrects laws universal where it fails the particular. The Lesbos straightedge image, without simply abolishing law. Unrestraint. Acrasia acting from passion against correct logos while still in some sense knowing the better. Possible because knowledge may be present yet not fully at work. Particular premise failure, passion as temporary derangement. It stands between vice, which endorses the bad end without regret, and virtue. It differs from softness, from spirited excess, and from rare animal-like or godlike extremes. Socrates' denial that anyone acts against knowledge is refined, not simply discarded. Friendship, necessary for life and beautiful in itself. Three species by the lovable, utility, pleasure, virtue, with complete friendship among the good who love each other for themselves and share life over time. Friendship holds cities together and is taken more seriously by lawmakers than justice alone. When people are friends, justice is less needed, yet among just things what inclines toward friendship is most just. Books 8 to 9 treat equality and superiority, political and familial forms, benefactors, proper self-love, dissolving friendships, and why the happy person still needs friends as shared being at work. Pleasure, not simply identical with the good, against Eudoxus taken flatly, yet not simply base. It completes unimpeded being at work as a bloom on the activity, whole in the now rather than a motion toward a further product. Kinds of pleasure track kinds of activity. Bodily pleasures need special treatment because they cure pain violently and seduce those unable to enjoy other pleasures. Book X's account prepares the ranking of contemplative happiness and the turn to law and education. Reading comprehension questions. Why does Sachs reject function for ergon and state/habit for hexis? And how do those choices reshape Book I's account of happiness? Reconstruct the ergon argument. What is the human work, and why must happiness be a being at work rather than a hexis alone? How is virtue both a mean and an extreme? What mistakes does the radio dial reading of the mean make? Distinguish willing, unwilling, and mixed actions. How does ignorance of particulars differ from ignorance of the universal in assigning blame? What is justice as someone else's good, and how does decency, epieikeia, stand a legal justice? How can one act against knowledge? Book 7. Distinguish unrestraint, vice, and softness. Why are there 3 kinds of friendship, and why does the happy person still need friends? How does Book X both demote and redeem pleasure? And why is contemplative happiness ranked above the political life? Critical probe. Aristotle claims discourses alone rarely make the many decent, and that law must habituate. What assumption about feeling and compulsion is he making, and what rival account of moral education might reject it? Critical probe. Where might, for the sake of the beautiful, seem too aesthetic for ethics? And how does Sachs answer that charge from sense perception and well-made action?